G'day, mate. 40 here, pretty excited. I just realized I found my niche, right? I found where I can contribute, man. I'm here to serve. And I think my niche is translator. I remember I used to write about the alternative film industry in the San Fernando Valley. And almost every day, people from the mainstream media would reach out to me and interview me and get my insights on what was happening in this forbidden world. I was able to translate what was going on in one forbidden world so that regular people could understand it. And so I was just doing some reading about how heavily committed American Jews are to American institutions and to getting the credentials that you need for success in America. And it leaves Jews exposed to those who increasingly have a hostile reaction to American institutions. So if you feel well served by American institutions, you very likely will vote for Donald Trump, vote against Donald Trump. If you feel as though American institutions are not on your side, you'll vote for Donald Trump and for MAGA. So the populist insurgent wing overwhelmingly feels like America's institutions are not on their side, that globalist institutions definitely not on their side, that America's foreign entanglements are against their interests. And I think I have something to say to help translate different sides to each other. It's like, oh, wow, I think I can make a contribution here. And one thing I can contribute is you don't have to take people at their word. So we're seeing an increasing rise in anti-Israel and anti-Jewish sentiment among populist nationalists because they associate Jews with America's leading institutions, because Jews have enjoyed extraordinary levels of success in American institutions. And so many populist, insurgents, nationalists feel as though Jews embody this globalist liberal elite that they think is hurting them. So when people voice anti-Israel or anti-gay or anti-Christian or anti-white or anti-black sentiments, it's not just something that's coming from someone's heart. Sometimes it is, but usually people are responding to incentives. Usually what people have to say is primarily dictated by the situation that they're in. And for podcasters and vloggers and bloggers and people who work in the attention economy, one of the best ways to get attention is to say skeptical things about Judaism, Jews, and the Jewish state, because those are the current incentives. And it doesn't mean that that's what's in their heart, that's what's truly driving them. It's recognition of what brings clicks and attention. So we are watching a fight over the power to define reality. That's a great paragraph from a great 2018 book, From Tolerance to Equality, how elites brought America to same-sex marriage. Right? No wonder people fight so hard. So to lose in this fight to define reality is not just to be consigned to the wrong side of history. It is to have the entire weight of the dominant culture, America's dominant institutions, pressed firmly against you, peeling away your friends and family, peeling away members, undermining the ability and willingness of the remainder to resist. You will be denied access to elite institutions and networks if you don't fall in line on same-sex marriage and all sorts of other topics. You will be denied all the material and social benefits that these elite institutions and networks confer. And you may very well experience the entire force of law and ultimately the power of the state used against you. So what we talk about on this show, one way to understand it is who has the power to define reality. Right? You may have a particular hero system. You may believe in the traditional truth claims of Orthodox Judaism or of Christianity or of Islam or whatever it is that powers your hero system. And as you move out into a wider, more cosmopolitan world and you feel the entire weight of America's institutions starting to bear down on you as a religious traditionalist or as a nationalist or as a populist, right, you sense this very fight to define reality.
Be having in this country. That's next up.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
The denied, allegedly affect the real lives of real people. If she's not Homeland Security Secretary, somebody else will be. I got a tip this morning that a cabinet secretary, prominent cabinet secretary, was on the way out. I've spent some time reporting on that. Haven't confirmed it yet, but again, not a policy argument, not something about the fundamentals of America. A lot of people contacting me about Gavin Newsom. Is he a phony? That's a big gossipy story that people talk about. Then right before we started today, I saw a thing that somebody texted me and asked me what I knew about it. Ted Cruz was at the White House when Nicki Minaj was there for this event on the Trump savings accounts. And there's chatter that he was denied a photo op. Is he with Nicki Minaj? Again, some of you would say, oh my goodness, Mark, I hope that's what your monologue's about. These are such interesting topics. The Melania movie, Kristi Noem being fired, Gavin Newsom, whether he's a phony, the allegedly denied Ted Cruz, Nicki Minaj photo op. Again, if we wanted to do the whole show on that, we could. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. What I'm here to talk about is there's something wrong with America that we can't have serious discussions. There's so much coverage of Minnesota, so much coverage of ICE and border protection, and the personalities of the president and Homan and Governor Walz. Too much of the conversation, in my view, is about these things. Too much.
So is there something wrong with America that we're tribal? No. What Mark Halperin is railing against here is the human condition. There are evolutionary adaptive reasons to be tribal. There are no evolutionary benefits that come with overcoming tribalism. You don't get evolutionary reproductive advantages by pursuing truth. So what Mark Halperin is advocating here is for people to overcome what is evolutionarily adaptive, right? We are wired to coordinate with our friends and to demean our rivals. Now, some people may try to overcome that wiring, and when they do so, it is a status play. So what Mark Halperin is advocating here and what he demonstrates is his status play, and it's a status play that I share. It's something that I try to emulate, but these are our status plays. We don't get to overcome the human condition.
The conversations about who's up and who's down. Okay. Politico Playbook. It's a morning.
So the bonobos or the chimps or those documentaries about gorillas in Africa, all right, this status is an essential preoccupation of living creatures, all right? You want to know who is the top gorilla, who's number 2, who's number 3, who's number 4. That's how we're wired. That's the result of evolution. If you don't pay attention to who's up and who's down, you're going to be at a disadvantage.
Tip sheet that's been published by Politico for a long time. And they're writing about this morning about the Democrats' list of demands to keep the government open, to avoid a partial government shutdown, of changes in policy that they want to see about how ICE conducts itself on the ground in Minnesota and around the country. Here's how Politico, this is A1, here's how they framed the Democratic efforts to force the hand of the White House and congressional Republicans to change. They say, if it turns out to be true that they do get some deal done, this would be a decent win for Democrats who spent all week demanding DHS funding be pulled out of the larger government funding package in the wake of Saturday's fatal shooting of Alex Pretti in Minnesota. Senate Dems yesterday said,
we are political animals. More importantly, we are social animals. And so part of being social is that you have friends. And when you have friends, you have enemies. The quickest way, the most effective way to bond with your friends is to share a common enemy. And I think Mark Halperin is doing this video to promote overcoming our tribal impulses and to focus on what's for the good of the entire country. But that's not how we're wired. There are no evolutionary advantages to making sacrifices for the good of America, right? In fact, that's an evolutionary losing strategy. So the only reason that anyone would deliberately engage in a losing strategy is because they are not playing that game. They're playing the status game that they hope to accumulate all the resources that come with winning. And so they're going to engage in something that looks like a losing struggle.
Set out a list of reforms to ICE that they want to see the price of their support for DHS funding. So there's a Washington process story about whether or not the Democrats are going to get their way because they have this leverage. Decent win for the Democrats. I just don't think that's the way we should be talking about it. Is it a win for Democrats or would it be a...
Oh, we shouldn't talk about the way that we naturally talk about it. So what Halperin wants us to do is to overcome the way that we are wired, to show off. For example, Think about the Pretti shooting, Alex Pretti shooting. So there were all these loud noises. People, anti-ICE agitators were blowing whistles. Pretti was armed. He was interfering in a federal law enforcement operation. And then someone yells he has a gun. And then there's apparently perhaps a sound of a gun going off. And critics of those who shot Pretti, critics of ICE, say that people should overcome the way they are wired. And we should incentivize people at times to try to overcome the way they are wired. But in that kind of high-stress environment, and you deliberately insert yourself into a federal law enforcement high-stress situation, and you're carrying a gun, right, you have maximally increased your chances of getting shot.
A win for the American people. And the question of whether it would be a win for the American people has to do with some of these really fundamental things that they're.
There is no evolutionary advantage to caring about the American people. The only reason that you'd care about the American people as opposed to your tribe in America is because you're playing a status game.
Asking about. These are hard policy issues. Should the ICE officials be able to wear masks? Big policy.
So how do you know when something is BS? When it is evolutionary reproductively maladaptive. If that is true, then it's BS. It is not what people claim. So when people claim that Mark Halperin is claiming he's caring about the good of America, but there's no evolutionary adaptive reason to do so. So what's really going on here is not Mark Halperin caring primarily about the good of America. Mark Halperin is making a status play, and he is setting aside the way he is wired to claim higher status. And about the only way you can do that is to also adopt the fictional buffered identity, right? All this stuff is going on outside of me, but inside my own brain, I can decide right and wrong. I can be strategic and autonomous. The most important forces are inside my head. It's a fiction. It's a useful fiction. There are many benefits that come with this fictional buffered identity, but that is not how we are wired. It would be evolutionary maladaptive to try to take that too seriously, right? It's a useful fiction to put on, but you're not going to reproduce. You're not going to successfully navigate life because life is wired in an alliance framework.
Policy discussion. Should they be able to go into the homes, private homes, without a judicial warrant? Should there be body cams on the officers? Should what kind of coordination should there be between ICE and local officials? These are policy questions undergirded by fundamental questions about America, fundamental questions about who we are as a people. What kind of policies are consistent with American values? And a lot of these arguments typically will be purely partisan. Policies that if a Democrat did them, Democrats would be less upset.
There are no American values. And politics and political alignments really have nothing to do with ideology, deeply held moral principles, right? It's all about forming alliances.
They're now upset because Donald Trump or Republicans doing them. Barack Obama deported a lot of people. Now, it wasn't conducted this way. A lot of it was on the border rather than in other states. But we've got to find a way as a country, as in the media, in politics, social media. We have to engage these debates. Can we still talk about the gossipy stuff and do this? We can. But too much of this is being crowded out. And I'm on this show, you'll see with the guests, I'm going to talk to them about some of these.
So I enjoy Mark Halperin's war on reality, right? I love what he's trying to do. But if he wants to be effective, he should admit that I am going to war with reality. This is not how people are wired. This is not to the individual's advantage. And I am engaged in this war on reality because of my own status play. I enjoy the status play. I try to emulate the status play, but it's a status play.
Tough policy questions. But we've got to, in the media first and foremost, because a lot of people in politics and government, they would like to talk about the substance.
So when you say we've got to do this thing, which is completely contrary to how we are wired, so I suppose from some people you will get status for doing that, but it's not a good life strategy. You need to just come clean and say, I'm making a status play that we do this thing, which is completely against how we're wired.
But they're relentlessly asked by my colleagues, who's up and who's down, who's going to win, who's going to get a decent victory. That's not the question that we should be focused on. The question we should be focused on is we're going to have.
So should we be focused on that which is against how we're wired and is against our evolutionary reproductive advantage? And I would say no. There's only a tiny number of people who can do what Mark Halperin is saying. And these are people who seek a certain type of status.
Have border security. We're going to have people deported. We're going to have an agency, whether it's ICE or somebody else, and border control. We're going to have them in the country under this president, going around communities and looking for people who they think should be removed. And then we're going to have sometimes judicial involvement, the third branch of government involved. And we're going to have a Congress scrutinizing all this. And in this case, one party making demands for policy changes. Then we're going to have the actual operations. And Homans made it clear Thursday morning that he wants to coordinate better with the Democrats. That's great, right? There's the policies, and then there's the practice. And a lot of the things the Democrats are demanding now in terms of policy that deserve a big, full conversation, they're dependent on legal changes and then policy changes and then the enactment of those policies. These are big issues, right? They go into the community and they see somebody. Should they be able to?
So we wired, is it to the ordinary person's advantage to devote major cognitive resources to considering these big issues that then have virtually nil effect on the person's daily life? No. This is a hobby for people like me who love politics, or for a tiny number of people who are exceptionally skilled, such as Mark Halperin, they can make a living out of it. But there's no way that we should expect your regular American to devote enormous cognitive resources to doing something which is incredibly painful and against how they're wired.
Ask somebody, let me see your papers. What's the probable cause to ask that? If they happen to arrest someone who's or detain someone rather, who's an American citizen, and they've done it in an improper way, should that citizen have some compensation? That's one thing Democrats are talking about. I'm not weighing in right here, although I have.
So when I see the video, right, because I am pro-immigration restriction, pro-immigration enforcement, generally pro-law enforcement, pro-ICE, right, I see Alex Pretti looking terrible.
An early morning press conference announcing Minnesota's top Democrats might be bending a little on their sanctuary city policies. I'll believe it when I see it. We haven't heard anything from them.
So Megyn Kelly is playing to a tribal base, right? This is a winning strategy.
I love Tom Homan. I'm not saying he's being insincere. I just don't trust. Do you trust Jacob Fry? I refuse to call him Jacob Frey. I won't. He's like a Fannie Willis to me. It's Fry. I don't trust him. All he's been saying is we will not assist. We're not helping federal immigration policy, which is exactly what his sanctuary city policy says. He's being totally consistent with the will of his voters and the policy that's in place right now in Minneapolis. So, I mean, Tom Homan says he's changing. He says Keith Ellison, the state attorney general, has said, yeah, he qualifies. He was terrorizing those ICE agents. I'm not excusing the other shit she said. He went there with an intent to kill the law. No. But that term, and you may recall all week long, I have said I'm not going to drag her on that term because we don't actually know the full extent of what Alex Pretti was doing out there. Like, I'm actually still open-minded on that term. Well, now we see this video. What would you call it? Watch.
This is a moment the news movement filmed on January 13th in Minneapolis, showing a man who appears to be Alex Pretti interacting with federal immigration agents 11 days before Border Patrol shot and killed him.
So when I see video like this, I don't care what happens to people. You pick a fight with law enforcement, or you just deliberately pick a fight with someone who has a gun, then to me, you have a suicidal wish. And if you get what you seek, it doesn't particularly bother me. On the other hand, I do want a fair, independent investigation. And if the law enforcement officers who shot and killed Alex Pretti didn't follow protocol, all right, if they made mistakes, then that should be announced and people should be trained so that they are the most effective law enforcement possible.
Footage was analyzed by the BBC, whose facial recognition technology confirmed his identity to a 97% degree of accuracy.
I'm going to admit, I just find this video hilarious. He is so awkward and hateful and out of his depth and out of his lane. And I personally don't feel bad that he was killed, because I just see him bringing this on himself. I recognize people who do feel terrible. I don't think that their hero system is just automatically inferior to mine.
On the morning of January 13th, our team received a tip that federal agents were blocking a street at the...
I can't imagine taunting, screaming, yelling at, and spitting on law enforcement officers and then kicking their vehicle. To me, this is a death wish.
Corner of East 36 and Park Avenue in Minneapolis. We arrived around 10:15 a.m. We saw observers shouting at the agents as they walked back to their vehicles. When they started driving away, the man kicked their taillight. An agent then got out of the vehicle, grabbed him, and pushed him to the ground. During the altercation, agents fired tear gas and pepper balls into the crowd. They continued to hold the man down before they retreat, and he walks away.
So apparently, they may have broken a rib of Alex Pretti here, which again doesn't bother me.
The man in our footage is wearing a similar outfit to what Pretti was wearing on the day he was killed.
So Alex Pretti and anyone else can simultaneously be loving and caring. He may well have been a great nurse, a great friend, a great son, a great lover, a person who was cultured or had many wonderful qualities. And he was also insane and out of his mind and acting in a suicidal fashion. So people are complicated. So don't surprise me. It doesn't shock me. It doesn't bother me if he had many wonderful qualities, right? I have some good qualities, believe it or not. There are some situations where I excel. There are other situations where I'm just average. Then there are all sorts of situations where I'm cringy, I'm weak, I'm bad, I'm terrible. And this is a situation that does not show Alex Pretti to his advantage. And so if you have any wisdom, you try to minimize your time in situations where they bring out the worst in you, and instead maximize your time in situations where you thrive. Like this, right? This is a situation where I thrive. This is a situation where I excel. This is what I do best. This is great, right? So I'm doing something that I do well, and I'm avoiding all those other cringy situations that I could be in right now.
What appears to be a gun is also visible above his waistband.
A gun visible in his waistband. So he was out there with his gun and his anger, trying to terrorize, actively harassing law enforcement, federal law enforcement, actually spitting on and attacking federal law enforcement. He was dressed exactly as he was on the day he was shot and killed. 11 days later, he smashed their vehicle's taillight in the process, angrily kicking it out. The whole thing came out of the back of the car and fell on the ground. And for the viewing audience, take a look at your screen. Pretti was armed in this confrontation too. You can clearly see his gun in his belt as he went out there and menaced these officers. Now, virtually every Second Amendment lover and expert I know has been trying to make the point this week to the people who say, oh, you can't just kill somebody because he's got a gun. Of course not. Urge the federal officers to assault him in a profanity-laced tirade.
Fuck you!
That's him. Fuck you.
What the fuck is wrong with you?
That's him yelling.
So I can't imagine that he is close to his parents. I just don't think someone who's close to his parents would speak this way. I can't imagine that he's close to that many people. I can't imagine that he has a child or a partner. I can't imagine that he's engaged in a productive love life, an exciting sex life. I can't imagine that if you've got something precious in your life that you would behave this way.
Fucking fraud! Look at you! Pepper spray, bitch! Fucking assault me, motherfucker!
Fucking assault me, motherfucker.
You guys! Fucking trash! Fucking trash!
Spits on the cop. Toward the cop. Kicks the cop's car.
Fuck you!
Double middle finger. Now the law enforcement officer, Border Patrol, gets out and confronts him. There's a physical confrontation in which he reportedly broke a rib. But he was literally begging. This is not hyperbole. This is not me using a figure of speech. He was literally saying, fuck you, fucking assault me, motherfucker.
And he got what he sought. And I'm not shedding any tears. So it's a big scandal, apparently, that during the vetting of Josh Shapiro, he was asked if he was an Israeli agent. Right? This doesn't shock me. It doesn't bother me. I don't think it's anti-Semitic. Right? Remember back in 1985, there was an American Jew who worked in the U.S. military or intelligence industrial complex, Jonathan Pollard, who stole American national security secrets and gave them to Israel, which may then have traded them to the Soviet Union. And ever since then, right, Jews in national security have undergone more intense background checks because what Jonathan Pollard did. And it particularly bothers me that the most intense Zionist Jews are the most likely to regard Jonathan Pollard as a hero. I think he was an enormous tragedy. Number one for America, and then number two for Jews, number three for Israel, number three for Zionists. I think he was a horrible person who made horrible choices. And it strikes me as completely commonsensical that as a result of this Jonathan Pollard disaster, that now American Jews have to undergo much more intense background checks. Right? Different nations have different interests. The interests of the United States and America are not identical. Now, many investigative journalists have documented this story, and they have referred to the secrets that Jonathan Pollard stole as the crown jewels of American nuclear secrets. I'm not saying that they're right, but Seymour Hersh, in his book, The Samson Option, and in his subsequent reporting in The New Yorker, says that Jonathan Pollard provided Israel with nuclear targeting data, detailed satellite imagery, and coordinates used by the U.S. to aim nuclear missiles at the Soviet Union. Right? A 10-volume NSA, National Security Agency guide to every radio signal the U.S. intercepted globally. So Jonathan Pollard provided Israel a map of the entire American global listening profile, global surveillance capabilities, what U.S. reconnaissance satellites could take photos from which angles, right? And apparently there are allegations that Israel then traded this information to the Soviet Union. Right? So the former CIA director, William Casey, believed that Israel traded this information to secure the release of Soviet Jews. So Israel, according to this allegation, used American hard power, nuclear targeting, signal intelligence to buy human capital, Jewish emigres, including scientists, from the Soviets. So U.S. intelligence officials believe that this trade compromised or led to the deaths of many American intelligence assets within the Soviet Union. Now, you could look at this as the Joseph model of intercession, right? Rising to a high rank to help one's people, right? In the transactional bazaar of the 20th century. But Jonathan Pollard wasn't just a spy for an ally, right? He was a source of a breach that allowed America's biggest enemy to see its most closely guarded secrets, right? This creates a lasting debt of suspicion against American Jews. This naturally results in more intense background checks, right? This is a huge cautionary tale used by institutionalists to justify their wariness of Zionists. Right? This is an absolute watershed moment for American Jews in the national security establishment. Prior to Jonathan Pollard's arrest in 1985, suspicion regarding American Jews' dual loyalty was something that would be talked about in a tiny number of circles. But after the damage became clear from Jonathan Pollard's espionage, right, where we have this clear, undisputed instance of a Jewish American civilian intelligence analyst selling secrets to Israel, and then Israel possibly selling those secrets to America's biggest enemy, the Soviet Union, right, this took all these unspoken, frequently unspoken suspicions, throughout the defense and intelligence communities and led to dramatic concrete changes in how the American government handled trust and vetting for Jewish employees and contractors. Right? Much more scrutiny. Security clearance interviews begin to routinely include questions about Jonathan Pollard and his actions. And it's incredibly disturbing how many American Jews support Jonathan Pollard and see him as a hero. So if you are acting as an agent of a foreign power in the United States, you should have to register, and you do. But somehow the parts of the Israel lobby get a pass on that, and I don't agree with that. Right? I think AIPAC should be forced to register as a foreign lobby. And one former Jewish community leader, not a year goes by without someone in the Jewish community, right, being denied because of the Pollard affair when applying for a sensitive role. And so the heightened, intense scrutiny, it stems not just from the horror of Jonathan Pollard's actions, but then from the reaction of parts of the Jewish Zionist community. So all sorts of leading Jews, including Dov Zakheim, former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense, right? They've noted the tendency of various Jewish organizations to champion Jonathan Pollard as a hero, a prisoner of Zion. Right? And this, of course, strengthens then suspicion against Jews throughout the government, particularly in the defense and intelligence sectors, that there are large parts of the Jewish community that might prioritize loyalty to Israel over loyalty to America, has to make the vetting process that much more arduous for those who follow in Jonathan Pollard's wake. So the old way of doing things was forever fractured. And so you have to have a tightening of background checks as a result. Now, in his new memoir, Where We Keep the Light, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro details an exchange during his brief but intense 2024 vice presidential vetting process that various Jewish leaders claim is anti-Semitic. So apparently a former White House counsel asked him if he'd ever been a double agent for Israel or communicated with an undercover agent of Israel. To me, it seems like a perfectly normal and responsible and commonsensical question. Right? I don't have a problem with that. I also don't have a problem with this idea, a great idea, I think, a Jewish sovereign wealth fund.
To an end. We can all feel the tremors of that in some way, shape, or form, no matter what our politics are, whether you're from the left, or the right, the center.
So he's saying the golden age of American Jewry has come to an end.
Or you're homeless or in between. My diagnosis for what's happening here is that American Jews have become like gargoyles. They are attached and beautifully attached to the parapets of institutions that are crumbling in America. We live now in a low trust society where the very things that the American Jewish community supported in order to secure its place in America and to show its gratitude for the blessings of being welcomed in the United States, those institutions are falling apart. And American Jews are caught in the crosshairs of that problem. And what I try to set up in the piece is historical understanding of what the Jewish community attempted to do in America, which I argue is a very largely scaled version of Stadlanut. Stadlanut is the Yiddish term for intercession. And historically speaking, in the diaspora, the Jewish community relied on very talented or resourceful members of the community to intercede with, to lobby basically, the court, wherever that may be. It could have been in Germany, it could have been in Baghdad, it could have been in Spain, it could have been in Italy. This practice was widespread. It was widespread in Ashkenazi and Sephardic lands where Jews lived. And it relied basically on trading Jewish success and material resources and wherewithal in exchange for rights, which were not automatically recognized. Now, the American context looks very, very different on the surface. Obviously, we're much more welcomed here in America than we have been in any other country, historically speaking. There are many blessings to the American democracy that Roger, I think, quite rightly expounds on in his response to my essay. But I would argue that what we have done here is take Stadlanut and expand it at a scale that's really unprecedented, but it's effectively the same thing. We've taken the institutions of the land, which is to say Congress, for example, or the State Department, and we've built mirroring institutions. So instead of having one person represent the Jewish community, it's an entire set of institutions that represent us in front of the United States and the broader public. And I argued that as a result, we've become very entrenched with ideas of institutionalism at exactly the time when those institutions are falling apart. And the reason why I make that case is It's an attempt to understand why the sudden spike in anti-Jewish hatred, especially online, especially in highly progressive or highly right-wing circles, what people are calling the woke right. What explains all of that? And I think the uniting factor in those two sides is an anti-institutionalism, which the Jews are become central players in because we are so bound up in those institutions which people no longer trust. The argument I make, which we can get to, is that the answer to this is to adopt.
So American Jews invested heavily in American institutions. And so how you feel about Jews will in large part be a reflection of how you feel about American institutions. So when you heavily invest in American institutions and then the American people steadily lose trust in American institutions, that's going to have an effect on you. So Jews have invested their expertise, their finance, their loyalty, they've gotten credentials in exchange for success in American institutions, right? They have enmeshed themselves in American institutions. And this looked like a pretty good deal for decades. The survival of a minority group depends usually on the stability of a society. And America is less stable these days because Americans have less in common with each other. So many of the most socially active, politically active Jews who push for an increasingly diverse America, well, that's what you've got. We have a more diverse America, meaning that we have less and less in common with each other, which reduces social trust, reduces social cohesion, and has reduced trust in American institutions. So American Jews have disproportionately aligned with Wall Street, with universities, with government bureaucracies, with NGOs. And so when these institutions lose status and trust in the eyes of particularly American nationalists, American populists, then Jewish status and power and privilege will drop as well. So this is no longer a winning coalition for Jews to be so embedded in America's institution. Maybe we need a sovereign wealth fund. Maybe we need to exit these failing coalitions instead of relying on the benevolent master of institutional liberalism. Right? Maybe we need to build ad hoc, mutually beneficial partnerships with a variety of actors, including anti-establishment forces, skeptics, populists, nationalists. Right? Maybe we should shift from being a supplicant seeking protection to a partner offering opportunity. Maybe we should invest in core American infrastructure such as energy projects and AI. Maybe the fund will create relationships and dependencies rather than simply seeking charity and protection. Right? This sovereign wealth fund would be legible, it would be respected, right? And maybe much more effective than relying on behind-the-scenes influence. Right? We can develop our own sovereignty. We can become a flexible and desirable ally to whoever holds power. We don't have to be dragged down by a crumbling establishment.
Adopt something like a Jewish sovereign wealth fund to adopt a whole new set of tactics in engaging with American society.
So sovereign wealth funds, as most of us know them, are gigantic government owned and led investment vehicles from countries like the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, which are in the business of purchasing, Formula One.
So this is Brett Stevens of the New York Times.
Events or golfing events. They're enrichment schemes or mechanisms for sovereign countries. Explain for a second how that might work in the American context, where obviously there is Jewish sovereignty. It just happens to be in Israel. But how would it work here? And would it, in fact, relieve the anti-Semitic tide if all of a sudden, in place of, say, the American Jewish Committee or all the other alphabet soups of organizations, you suddenly...
So people who are not invested in you one way or another, or even people who are more hostile or negative towards you, right? Pretty much everyone is going to feel better about you if what you're doing is legible, if they can see, know, and understand what you're doing. And so a Jewish sovereign wealth fund would be legible. It would be knowable, right? It's a very different model from behind-the-scenes influence.
He had a multi-billion-dollar fund of money coming from fabulously well-to-do Jews supporting specifically Jewish causes, as opposed to the traditional mechanisms of Jewish philanthropy, which to some extent go to Jewish causes, in other ways fund.
So most Jewish philanthropy does not go to Jewish causes. American Jews overwhelmingly invest in American philanthropies, not particularistic Jewish philanthropies.
Hospitals and research institutions.
Which would make sense because most American Jews are America first, Jewish second, right? Most American Jews are not Orthodox Jews.
And other gifts to America beyond the purely Jewish interest. Doesn't that do more to?
And the chat says this is all about who Jews will subjugate next. Well, look, bro, you're always either going to be the top or the bottom. Do you want to be the bottom or do you want to be the top? Do you want to be the actor? Do you want to be sovereign? Or do you want to be a passive receptacle for other people's thrusting?
Accentuate or accentuate an anti-Semitic stereotype rather than relieve it.
Yeah. So to your first question, how would it work? I think a very interesting way to start would be if a group of Jewish financiers got together and invested in bringing, let's say, TNT manufacturing back to the United States. We don't make any TNT explosive in the United States anymore for a whole.
So what's the alternative? Let's keep going with behind the scenes lobbying, right? That will be a more effective path forward. And so we could see the United States going to war with Iran, and speculation can just run rife, and evidence can be presented about Jewish lobbying, perhaps for the war in Iran. Is that a better model than, say, a Jewish sovereign wealth fund that creates factories and employs people?
I think we just blew up the last factory in Tennessee.
Yeah. Right. So we get it all from Poland.
Someone blew it up.
Someone blew it up. Right. Someone blew it up. We get it all from Poland, which is highly problematic for a number of reasons. First and foremost, Poland is in a very dangerous part of the world now. And we need some of that TNT. And wouldn't it be nice if the Jewish community could say, we are.
So this builds on Yoram Hazony's suggestion that American Jews need to negotiate and find common cause with American nationalists.
Responsible for bringing this back to the United States, reindustrializing the country, bringing back American jobs. That is the kind of purchase that I think the community needs. And I don't think it would actually require $1 trillion wealth fund to be able to do something like that. But to the question of whether this would increase anti-Semitism, I think we're already getting blamed for having all the money anyway. So what benefit are we getting out of it by not spending it wisely?
So why are Jews getting blamed for having all the money? Because it's a natural evolutionary human desire that when you see someone else with something that you don't have, to want it, right? It's not something that's just particularly aimed at Jews, right? It's not something that is just uniquely anti-Semitic. It's not a function of some false consciousness or bigotry. The most average, normal human reaction is to see someone else with something that you want but don't have and to want to take it. So anyone who gets rich will be looked at enviously, and there will be people who want to take their wealth away. It's not something that's a unique challenge for Jews.
My argument here is that the constituency that the Jewish community needs to reach isn't the people suffering from what I call in the piece Jewish derangement syndrome, which are people that are obsessed with Jews. They think about them all day, every day, and they hate them qua Jews. What I'm interested in are the people who are anti-institutionalists, who are therefore more skeptical of the Jewish community because of its association with institutions. If the Jewish community can break away from those institutions and show that it is authentically itself, I think it can win those people over. The danger that the Jewish community faces is in driving.
Yeah, so between being yourself and being legible, being known and being out in the open versus acting in hidden ways, which do you think will be a more popular approach by people who aren't predisposed one way or another towards you? Right? I think it's better to be legible out in the open.
Driving those people into the arms of those who suffer from what I call Jewish derangement syndrome. And I think the wealth fund is a tactic for being able to achieve a split of those audiences rather than driving them into the hands of those suffering from JDS, for sure.
The model of the relations of Polish Jewry to the Polish court or Lithuanian Jewry to the duchy, and the American model, where we are, of course,
Newport, Rhode Island. I mean, it's quite clear from the outset that the creedal nation was.
All right, there's no such thing as a creedal nation. Just imagine how brilliant you have to be. Just imagine how smart you have to be. Imagine, just try to conceive how smart you have to be to want to live into such an abstract world, right? A world so removed from reality that you believe this flesh and blood nation state, the United States of America, founded by human beings who are primarily interested in creating a nation state for themselves and for their progeny. And this guy's invested in, America's an idea. America's primarily a creed. America is primarily an ideology. America is primarily a certain set of philosophical outlooks on life. Right? Just about how removed from reality you have to be. You must have such a thrill just thinking about abstract concerns that you can possibly conceive that America is primarily a set of beliefs. Right? That is not evolutionary adaptive. People wouldn't last sacrificing and making choices on the basis of a set of philosophical beliefs. Right? This goes against everything we know about human evolution. It's absolutely impossible. And this guy is so smart. He's making such a status play in something completely against reality.
Incorporated Jews from the outset, and that what
America incorporated Jews from the outset to varying degrees, depending on circumstance. Jews didn't have the same privileges, and you wouldn't expect them as the dominant core of the country. But there were places that were more or less friendly to Jews, or to Roman Catholics, or to Mormons, or to Seventh-day Adventists. And to think that America was just all along primarily a creed, my God.
What Washington wanted was, hey, what every other citizen should be doing, which is be good citizens, and that's it, and engaging in all.
And that's it. And that's it. Guess what? When people look at a member of an outgroup who they don't know, they just impute an essence to them. So if you're not Jewish and you see Jews, you just think, there's Jew. Or if you're not Christian, you see or hear about Christians, you just think, there's this essential Christian there, or black or white, or that's what we do with outgroups. We don't think about members of outgroups as just sovereign citizens. We don't consider them primarily as individuals, right? It's a nice fiction, right? There are some benefits to believing that everyone's just an individual, but the way the world works, we have to make alliances, and with alliances, we will always have enemies, and so we just sort the world into friends or enemies, and we don't have enough cognitive resources nor incentives to give great consideration to individual characteristics unless we know certain people well.
All aspects of American life, and we've done that both in the establishment and elite world, and as you know, Brett, elsewhere. So it seemed to be just counter the American Jewish experience, and then the other piece is that even if you want to entertain,
so the building up status in elite institutions, let's say that was a great strategy for Jews until now. It's obviously no longer a great strategy.
That there is relevance here, Stadlanut, and to the American Jewish experience. It seemed to be sort of the analysis required. The question really I had in mind for Jordan is, how does the state of Israel change that? Because once you have the establishment of the state of Israel, the sovereign, the
state of Israel changes things for American Jews because it's socially unacceptable in any country to put the welfare of another country ahead of your own. So if you're an American Jew, it's a really bad idea to advertise that you are more interested in the welfare of the Jewish state of Israel than you are in the United States of America. If it's true, you should go move and live in Israel.
State for the Jewish people is Israel. And that, of course, radically changed the way American Jews live and exist in the United States and Jews across the world. And specifically, as it relates to U.S. security assistance to Israel, which was incorporated in Jordan's.
So increasingly, Zionists recognize it as a massive liability for the Jewish state to be receiving aid from America. And Jewish leaders in America and in Israel, including Bibi Netanyahu, right, recognize that receiving American aid is overall a bad deal for Israel.
Peace, that is really the domain between two sovereign states, as the U.S. government and the government state of Israel. And I don't think any sovereign wealth fund, for that matter, should sort of be assuming that role on behalf of the government state of Israel. So, I think on a number of levels, the sovereign wealth fund didn't seem to me a persuasive way to address many of the ills and important questions that Jordan highlights. And maybe the last one, and I'll pause and turn it back to you, Brett, is that I don't think the sovereign wealth fund construct is a proven tool. I actually think of it as a tool for the weak. I mean,
well, guess what? There is no people who is always strong, right? There will always be situations where Jews are weak. And so if this is a tool for the weak, then Jews have weaknesses, right? Let's use it if it's adaptive.
Jordan's article references, the Gulf states. These are states that don't have much to show for anything other than their wealth. They don't share democratic values.
They don't share democratic values. That's such a meaningless expression. So for the dominant elite in this country, democratic values mean that the people of California can vote for a referendum to deny certain public services to illegal aliens, and some Supreme Court judges on California's top court can just overturn it. And that's the essence of democracy, right? A few judges get to overturn the will of the people, right? To me, that's not exactly an embodiment of democratic values. Democratic values is one of those vague incantations by intellectuals that effectively can mean anything to anyone.
That we do. They don't share the long history of.
I mean, how much do Israelis invest in democratic values? I'm sure for some people it's important, but overall the people primarily is concerned with security, with safety, with prosperity, and with sovereignty. And the mechanics of arranging how much dictatorship, how much democracy, how much socialism, how much capitalism, how much authoritarianism, how much liberty, right, will always change and depend on situations which are constantly evolving.
Of the American Jewish community has within the United States from its founding. And so if you're weak and all you have is cash, set up a sovereign wealth fund. But I think the American Jewish community is better off double downing on the values that this country was founded on and continue.
This country wasn't founded on values. This country was founded by flesh and blood people looking to protect and advance their own flesh and blood interests for themselves and for their progeny. What an abstract world this guy must live in to think that America was founded on values.
To perpetuate them as Lincoln sought to do.
Jordan's essay begins by noting that the golden age of American Jewry is coming to an end. And I suspect you would agree that even on the rosiest view of American life today, let's put it this way: the Mamdani-Carlson axis of increasingly prominent voices within the Democratic Party as well as within the Republican Party are something that is new, or at least new to the Jewish experience, or at least new to the Jewish experience in my lifetime and probably the lifetime of.
Yeah, if you're incredibly sheltered and unaware of other people's experience of life, this will be new to you. But shocking insight, most Americans are primarily cared about America, not about foreign nations.
Of our parents, you mentioned the creedal aspect of American American.
So seriously, how important do you think the creedal aspect of American identity is to Americans? Right, I would say perhaps 5% of people it's important, and for 95% of people it's not important. So nationalism always does contain a creedal element, a civic element, a cultural element, a religious element, a historical element, an ethnic element, a racial element, a blood and soil element. It will always contain a mixture, but no nationalism that works for people is primarily about a creed, right? Nationalism works as an extended family. And people don't develop families based on creeds.
Identity. But take something like J.D. Vance's speech at the Republican National Convention in 2024, where, he talks about, the land where he was born, the grave, the Kentucky grave in which he plans to die. This is a kind of quite frankly, a blood and soil. I don't mean to.
Judaism has a ton of blood and soil. Land is very important in Judaism. In Zionism, it's an essential part of Zionism. There's nothing uniquely Nazi about loyalty to blood and soil. It's the human condition. It's the human tendency.
Suggest the vice president is borrowing Nazi tropes, but it is a classic European blood and soil vision of this country that has never worked particularly well for the Jews. So I guess
Zionism contains a considerable blood and soil element. Has Zionism worked for Jews? So yeah, there are tensions between different nationalisms. Gentile nationalisms present some tensions for Gentiles and for Jews. Jewish nationalism presents some tensions for Jews and for Gentiles. Jews have not transcended ties of blood and soil. Ties of blood and soil are endemic to the human condition, whether someone's Jewish or Gentile.
The question is this: is it your conviction that what Jordan sees as a kind of an end of an era is maybe more of a passing phase? And if it is, or either way, shouldn't it be the smart play for Jews to start adjusting their sails to a new period in which conspiracy theory, old-fashioned anti-Semitism disguised as anti-Zionism, other forces at play?
Stories, narratives, or what you call conspiracy theories have always been attractive to people because they make life more exciting and they work with people emotionally, and it doesn't really matter whether they're factually true or not. So we don't live in some unique age where suddenly a good story provides emotional sustenance to people without regard to factuality.
Are just reshaping the conditions that American Jews have known for at least the last century or so.
So, before that was he was concerned at the time. He was 28 years old, as you know.
He loves Lincoln. This guy loves Abraham Lincoln.
Well, and the founders of the nation had passed, and he was worried about the perpetuation of the institutions that governed our country. And at the time, he was worried about the vigilantism and others. And
yes, people who have institutional power are worried that people outside the preferred institutions may exercise power.
Lawlessness and people taking the law in their own hand. And what he said is that we have to go back into the sober reason and go back to the spirit of the.
Yeah, sober reason. That's just such a great guide for humanity. Right? We don't run on reason. We run on tribal loyalty. There's no adaptive evolutionary advantage to following sober reason on these globalist moral philosophical issues.
The founding, but using as much as our mind, as much as our heart, and I think that is really the construct that I think we ought to draw from. It could be that our institutions are falling.
Dennis Prager had a good line. He said, Jews are the last believers in the Enlightenment, right? And the Enlightenment glorified the Buffett identity and the pursuit of reason, right? If we just all follow reason, then we will achieve better ends. Rather naive perspective on human nature.
Falling short. I'm not persuaded that a sovereign wealth fund is the framework that's going to get us to respond to the moment. I mean, you note Tucker, somewhat ironic as we're having this conversation. I think he's still in Qatar, where he's living up there and is said he's going to buy some real estate there, right? So the sovereign wealth fund of Qatar has effectively been able to buy off Tucker Carlson, but
I know a lot of Jews just find that analysis very compelling and very comforting. It wasn't the sovereign wealth fund of Qatar that bought off Tucker Carlson. What brought off Tucker Carlson is that he grew towards attention and clicks and audience, and he skated to where he saw the puck was going. He is a leader of the populist nationalist insurgency, which has taken over the Republican Party. And this group puts the highest priority on America and has a great deal of suspicion of foreign entanglements, and for some good reason. So Tucker didn't have to be bought off to come to his nationalist perspective, right? It's a demeaning opinion.
I'm not sure they're buying off much more than that. The other point I make is that, our friend Jordan over here, he's sitting in the offices of Palantir Technologies, and they are doing amazing work at countering some of the ills, Brett, that you've articulated. So it's not just Jewish institutions alone that we rely on in this
Palantir is not going to change people's hero systems.
country as American Jews to respond to the ills in this moment. So by reminding us about some of these founding principles and what
principles will do nothing, next to nothing for you. If we're ever in a great state of danger, if there's ever mass anarchy loosed on the streets, you can invoke principles and laws all day long. In the final analysis, the only thing that will govern society is the ability of the state apparatus to use coercion and force. Principles won't do it.
what American civic life and is about.
So I imagine Tucker's feeling entirely at home, ideologically speaking.
Brett, there was a heart that just went up on the screen. As for the record, I want to let everybody know that was not me hearting myself. Although if it was a response to something I said, I'm deeply appreciative.
I suspect that Tucker Carlson is at home pursuing his own interests, right? Pursuing his own hero system, which is a different hero system from mine. It's a different hero system from everybody in this video. So we all have our own subjective, partisan, particularist hero system, and it doesn't mean that other people's hero systems are just ipso facto inferior. That Tucker has a different hero system from everybody in this video doesn't make him bad or wrong.
As an ethnic community, probably we are more represented by various organizations advancing Jewish interests than any other ethnic group I can think of. I mean, it always astounds me in my 30-year acquaintanceship with the world of Jewish org.
So Jews are hyper interested in the future of Jews, the demographics of Jews, Jewish influence, Jewish power, what's in the best interests of the group. Why would other groups not think similarly?
To what extent in your view, are those organizations doing more collectively? I'm not talking about any specific organization, but collectively now, in a sense, harming the overall interests of the American Jewish community?
Political level, I think you could do away with most American Jewish institutions and be better.
Why do we have so many American Jewish institutions? Because people want to feel important. People want status. And if they could be the leader of an institution, they could issue pronouncements from the Anne Frank Museum at such and such a city. As I remember, various people from various Anne Frank institutions would condemn Donald Trump for some immigration enforcement infraction that violated the ethos of Anne Frank. People want to feel important, and the things that people do to feel important not necessarily aligned with the best interests of Jews or Americans.
Better off, quite frankly. I think to understand why, you have to take a step back and understand what's happening.
So you will find the greatest rabbis, the greatest Orthodox rabbis, men of God, men of Torah, and they won't go to a particular institution because at that institution, they would be number two. And for the sake of their own ego, it's absolutely necessary to them that they be number one. And so they'd rather be at some dinky institution in Switzerland as compared to, say, Yeshiva University, because at least at their tiny, dinky institution in Switzerland, they're number one. That's why there are so many Jewish institutions and other unnecessary institutions for other groups, because people are driven by ego and the demands of status. And if they can be number one at something, they're not going to trade in that ego massage very lightly or easily. Even the holiest, most godly, most Torah-centric, right, is still driven by their desire to be top dog, number one, highest status.
Happen in American society. And in a post-COVID world, the collapse in trust in institutions accelerated so dramatically. It was already intensified.
So Jews bet on American institutions and American credentials, and it served them until now when Americans are losing trust in institutions. So maybe there needs to be a new path for Jews.
Over the past 30 years. If you look at the Gallup does this poll on trust in institutions, it's basically been like what the Jewish community has done is almost subconsciously feeling that they've grabbed a hold and tried to save these things. And the problem is when you invoke anti-Semitism and call everything anti-Semitic, for example, there's a group of people for whom they're not necessarily anti-Jewish, but when they hear that, the thing they're most interested in is, for example, censorship, and they feel like they're being censored. So I think that's a great example of self-defeating behavior. And what is calling something anti-Semitic? It's an appeal to authority. It's us attempting to call on the institutions, the gatekeepers of yesteryear, and say, this doesn't belong in polite society. It needs to be written out. The Jewish community should be protected. But there's nobody manning those gates anymore. The gates don't even exist. Manhattan Institute put out a poll last week that said...
So when will non-Jews side with Jews? When it's in their interest to do so, when they feel more in common, when there's a sense that we're allies together and we share a common enemy. When will non-Jews turn against Jews? When Jews are allied with their enemies. You always have to be mindful of the friend-enemy distinction.
25% of people in the GOP voters under the age of 50 have expressed openly anti-Semitic views. And a fifth of GOP and Democratic voters self-identified as anti-Semitic. That's not just a sea change. I mean, that is happening like a freight train hitting our community, and our institutions are not built to respond at that speed and at that pace. I think that's a huge problem. And you know, in the military, they talk about the OODA loop. This is fitting for Roger being out at the Reagan Defense Forum. The OODA loop, which is about just, you know, the OODA loop is a framework: observe, orient, decide, and act. And the enemies of the Jewish community are inside our OODA loop. Everything we have done from the rise of this movement, whatever you might want to call it, say 2 years ago, roughly speaking, until now, we have been in complete reaction mode. There's not a single moment where I can say the Jewish community has taken the initiative and been out in front. Basically, our entire lives are some mixture of going to Jewish conferences and making each other feel better, listening to our own podcasts. And
so guess what? Considering the perspective of other groups, considering what effect will this have if I or my group act or speak in this way? How will this then affect other groups, right? That would be a good step forward. Other people have their own experience of life. They have their own hero systems, and taking in consideration other people and what effect your choices will have on others, right? I think that would be a nice step forward for every single minority group, including my own.
Saying, wow, it's great that we know sane people who haven't lost their minds, and getting on WhatsApp groups, as Dan Sinner.
So when people turn against Jews, they haven't lost their minds. They've simply adapted towards what they feel is in their own group's best interest, right? Different groups have different interests. It's not in the best interest of every individual and every group to be philo-Semitic.
To say, can you believe? Can you believe? And I think our institutions are basically in can you believe it mode. What I tried to do here, whether or not you think it's a good idea, which I happen to think it's a good idea, is push the conversation forward and think of something that can get inside their OODA loop and disrupt them. And what tools do we have to disrupt the OODA loop of these people? And I think this is one of those tools.
But let me just push you on this. There are people who arrive at anti-Semitism through the short route, let's say, and then there's this other group of people who...
People don't have an essence. People aren't just inherently anti-Jewish or pro-Jewish, right? People react to incentives. People react to changing circumstances. And we can have an effect on other people, right? The way that Jews make choices, the way that Jews speak, the way that Jews act, collective groups have different interests under stress. When the interests are intense enough and the conflicts are intense enough, then really bad things happen. It's not as though there's just this mystical thing called anti-Semitism and there are no equivalents. right? The more intense your in-group Jewish identity is, the more likely you are to have negative feelings, fears, concerns, anxieties, and hostility towards non-Jews. And the more intense non-Jews develop their unique in-group identity, whether it is religious or racial or ethnic or nationalist, right? They are more and more likely, due to social identity theory, to have negative feelings about Jews.
Short route or long route, people have been.
So the advantage for the use of the term anti-Semitic is that it's a sacred term. And whenever you make anything sacred, you can't talk about it rationally. You can't see it rationally. You can't have clarity on it, right? As soon as you give sanctity to a topic, you then obscure it.
Finding ways to arrive at anti-Semitic conclusions in one society after another from time immemorial. If we were having this conversation 50 or 60 years ago, the anti-Semites would not be accusing us of being too close to the establishment or too associated with the establishment. We would be too associated with the anti-establishment. There were too many Jews involved in the American Communist Party. There were too many Jews who were prominent hippies. For you is, your analysis seems to be that the specific Jewish problem right now is we are too close to the institutions. But in fact, wouldn't we just be substituting one form of anti-Semitism with another by?
There is no eternal solution to group conflicts of interest and to negative feelings about various groups, including our own. So that this proposed solution of a Jewish sovereign wealth fund, that it is not the eternal solution to all Jewish problems, does not diminish it.
Moving away from these institutions? And if so, what is our other defense, if there is any other defense?
Yeah. Well, first of all,
the best defense is to be as aligned as possible with the interests of the other groups that you live around. That's the best defense, right? Not shared values, but shared interests. And what this guy is proposing is, let's pay a little bit more attention to shared interests.
well, I think it's true that Jews were attacked for being anti-establishment, but they were also attacked for being part of the establishment back then too. So it does go all ways. I think fundamentally that this audience that I'm talking about, what I would call Jewish skeptics who arrive at it by what you say the long road, are still winnable. It is still possible, even now, for the Jewish community to ensure that those people don't fall into the hands of those suffering from Jewish derangement syndrome. And I think it's key to our survival, not necessarily physically, although possibly, but certainly politically, as a political force in the United States, to ensure that we don't lose that audience. I think that audience.
And the Kip says, strangely enough, it's the Semites who dislike Jews the most. It's not strange. The more close you are to another group, the more tightly constricted the geography that you share, and the more likely you are to have intense feelings.
Audience spans the political spectrum on the left and on the right. And if we lose those people, we're going to lose 20 to 30 years, because I think we are in a long-term anti-institutional moment. And so it's necessary for our community to pivot.
Why would you not want to have multiple strategies? So let's say you're a tribe and you've built your entire diet based on hunting, but then there's some kind of change, and so the animals that you're hunting are no longer available, right? Why would you not want to have a strategy to be able to feed yourself some other way? Maybe develop agriculture, right? Maybe start learning which twigs and berries that you can eat, right? Why would any group not want to have multiple strategies at its disposal? It's like deciding when you're in 8th grade, like I did, oh, I'm going to be a journalist when I grow up. Well, journalism is a viable business, died about 20 years ago. So why would you not want to have other economic strategies available? And as the situation's always changing, right, why would you not want to be adaptable?
And understand where we are. And sometimes you're right, the pivot has to change. Sometimes we have to get more institutionalist. This is one of those moments when we have to go less institutionalist. Why is the wealth fund an answer? Because first of all, it moves with speed. And the speed at which the conversation moves now on social media is staggering. And we continue, sorry to cast aspersions on you, Brett, but I think the community continues to draw on the connections that it knows and is comfortable with. It's op-eds, it's going to the Times or the Wall Street Journal, I'm sorry, I'm attacking
Publishing long essays in quarterly journals read by influential Jews.
There are people who are engaged in the street warfare, and I'm not sure that Wells would be very good at that. But one thing I
offer perhaps a little more precision. We should not be blaming ourselves for anti-Semitism.
Oh, there's a winning recipe. Let's not do any self-reflection. Boy, that's really in alignment with the Jewish history and Jewish text, right? Of course, our choices have an effect on non-Jews. So it's not a matter of blame. It's just a matter of figuring out what are more adaptive ways of speaking and acting in the world so that we present, say, less of a threat to other groups. What are the things that we can do to reduce the incentives for other people to hurt us?
An element explicit on Jordan's part, it suggests that it's our failing or things that.
I wonder if this guy's ever read the Hebrew Bible, right? The dominant perspective in this topic in the Hebrew Bible is that it's our failings that cause our suffering. But there is an enormous audience for any in-group to hear that there's nothing they've done that is wrong. So this guy is just speaking to the converted, telling them the poison that they want to hear.
That we've done wrong and somehow has invited this anti-Semitism. I think that's just wrong. Should our institutions be better at responding, deal with this, and address some of the inadequacies that Jordan has mentioned? Absolutely. The flare-up with Vice President Vance speaking in Ole Miss at a Turning Point event, and then shortly after, Tucker hosting Fuentes, and then we also had Bill, and then you have everybody else. The Ben Shapiros of the world that are.
Ben Shapiro is incredibly unlikable, right? I agree with almost everything Ben Shapiro says, but he's unlikable, right? He does give support for his in-group, but he fuels an enormous amount of antipathy for Jews at the same time.
Last point, a sovereign wealth fund to me suggests sort of solving the problem and by addressing, I think, a weakness, which is if you centralize things, if you're driving one entity to somehow.
It's a very long fight, and the community doesn't have the time to wait and for that to correct itself before we lose a lot of political ground. And frankly, as much as I laud the efforts of the people that you just spoke about, that to me is all reactive. And what I'm looking for is something that can help us take the initiative to this, and there's the American Jewish piece of this. So let me take the first Israel piece of this first. I think that the dependency on Washington has been deleterious to Jerusalem over time, strategically and politically. There was a really harrowing article by Jake Siegel, and I think it was the October issue of Tablet magazine, which talks about the degree to which Israeli strategic culture was affected by American strategic culture over the course of the military aid. And
have they considered charm school? I'm arranging financing right now for charm school for Haredi Jews. Right, I've already got plans. I've already got some financing, but together, I think we can make a fortune here.
The fact that Israel started to fight like an American force, which it is not an American force. It is not, doesn't have America's strategic posture. And it was an inappropriate way of thinking about Israel and how it should fight. It effectively engaged in a Rumsfeldian cutting back on the kind of meat and potatoes of what a military needs to fight in exchange for high-tech and special forces. And we saw the results of that, I think, on October 7th, among many other things. I think that Israel should end.
Yeah, the $4 billion U.S. subsidy to Israel is a massive millstone around Israel's neck. It's a really bad thing for Israel and for Zionism.
That dependency over time, just as it ended the dependency on economic aid. And Bibi himself has acknowledged this, most recently just 2 weeks ago, I think, in an interview, that Israel needs to wean itself off of American military aid and wean itself really off of being a client state and more of a natural and equal partner in the region. I'm not saying that the countries should head for.
Yeah, Israel in the long run, from my perspective, should seek to move from being a sacred state to the United States to simply being another pragmatic ally where we will have some interests in common. And when we have some interests in common, then we have incentives to act together.
For divorce, I think they should have a natural relationship and an equal relationship. I think the aid has affected that. But that's almost less important to me. The more important thing to me is, what is the aid doing to the American Jewish community? And I think it's very hard to argue that the aid has not become an albatross around the neck of the.
Everything you subsidize tends to increase corruption. If you're using these unnecessary subsidies, Israel doesn't need this $4 billion subsidy. It's a millstone. It's an albatross.
The American Jewish community. It is $3.8 billion that costs far more politically for us in this country, given the attitude toward foreign aid and military action abroad. To wit, in an August poll that the Free Beacon put out, 44% of young conservatives agreed with the statement that ending U.S. military aid to Israel would make me feel better about the U.S.-Israel relationship. I think it would speak volumes to Americans if the Jewish community stepped up and took some of the burden off of the taxpayer there, a burden that honestly could be well filled if American Jews invested in defense technologies in Israel that are good for both countries, by the way, because the United States can benefit from those technologies as well. But the deeper psychological point here is that I think American Jews need to affect some sort of almost American Jewish Zionism here. They need to act with agency. And the Wealth Fund is a way for them to act with agency. It's not to break away from Israel. It's not to undermine Israeli sovereignty. It is to establish a distinct identity that they can be a power in the United States and affect how the United States does business and how.
All right, let's move to something much more uplifting. Great news, guys. City leaders have joined the Silver Lake community to remove street signs that targeted gay men. Right, here is something all patriots, all right-thinking people can rejoice.
Neighborhood takes down street signs from the 90s that officials say discriminated against the LGBTQ plus community. The signs that read "No cruising" and prohibited U-turns were installed.
That kind of homophobia, where people put up signs to try to discourage strangers having sex in their front yards. Right, this kind of homophobia should have no place in our country. So glad to see these signs removed. Thank God.
Installed in Silver Lake along Griffith Boulevard and Halperin. It was an area known to be a hotspot for gay men.
These are kind of a relic of an era of the 90s when gay men would meet up here after hours. Cruising, of course.
They would just meet up and discuss poetry, right? They weren't just having random sex with strangers. I'm getting a tear in my eye when I think about this progress. Right. You want to be on the right side of history, don't you?
This meant something very different. It meant an opportunity for the LGBT community to try to find human connection and intimacy.
The sign.
People were just trying to find human connection and intimacy through having random sex with randos on the street, right? And you're not willing to celebrate that? What kind of freak are you?
Signs finally came down today, more than 10 years after the Silver Lake Neighborhood Council voted to dismantle them in 2011.
I'm heading out there tonight to have some human connection and intimacy with randos. Man, this is so exciting. Right? We gotta take down these anti-gay, no U-turn signs, these no cruising signs. I can't make peace with that type of homophobia. Just makes me ill. Right? Thank God the New York Times is on the story. A relic of LA's anti-LGBTQ past comes down. The strange. I can't think of anything more strange than objecting to strangers having sex on your front lawn. Like, what kind of freak are you to not want strangers having sex on your street? Right? The strange no U-turn signs along Griffith Park Boulevard in Silver Lake were erected in the 1990s to ward off gay men. Why would they want to ward off gay men? It doesn't make any sense to me. So why were we using the coercive power of the state to try to prevent gay men from human connection and intimacy? Right, for many Angelinos, I mean, for me, certainly, the road signs that have been posted in the Silver Lake neighborhood in the last 2 decades forbidding U-turns from midnight to 6 a.m. Just another example of the city's seemingly arbitrary and extremely specific traffic regulation. Well, no, I know what was going on. It was homophobia, right? Longtime members of the area's LGBTQ community, right, they know the score, right? These are vestiges of a painful, not so distant past where LA's queer spaces were targeted rather than celebrated. Why can't you celebrate Random strangers having sex on your street and on your front yard and dropping off used condoms and spreading disease. Why can't you celebrate that? Thank God these signs have been removed. So the signs were posted in 1997 in response to residents' complaints that the boulevard had become a hotspot for gay men looking for sex partners. There were 9 of these signs on Griffith Park Boulevard. So homophobic to not want gay men having sex with strangers on your street. So here we've got these homophobic residents who don't want strangers soliciting sex and having sex on their block, right? And this repulsion to stranger sex on their front yard, right? This would cut across ideology, class, race, right? Religion, secular, right? It was widespread human reaction. People didn't want strangers having sex on their front yard. But then we get this elite moral coalition that comes along to make us better, right? That treats enforcing the public order as bigotry. So the concrete interests of these residents gets laundered into an abstraction. It's just noise. It's just traffic flow, man. What about the historical trauma? What about this symbolic discrimination, right? And so the news media doesn't talk about the actual behavior that residents are objecting to. Right, the no cruising signs are redescribed as traffic management tools that secretly targeted LGBTQ people. Right, not false, but it's incomplete. Right? The missing piece is that cruising meant repeated approaches by strangers seeking sex on a residential street in a residential space. Right, so speaking plainly, well, you are going to then be called anti-gay or anti-sexual freedom. Right. You are going to be stigmatized. You are retrograde. You are primitive and medieval. What are you, some kind of freak? So why does this sanitized framing dominate now? Because the power has shifted. So up until the early 2000s, right, city governments balanced the requests of residents with the requests of police and the requests of various vice economies. Now our elite cultural, political institutions all align reflexively with various sexual identity coalitions. And any challenge to the narrative of these favored sexual identity coalitions, who must never be criticized, must never have their objective activity described plainly, right? That is illegitimate, right? Even when the behavior is gross, intrusive, unwanted. So the signs stayed up for decades because they reflected what people wanted on those streets. Then gay activists translate these signs into a moral symbol of past oppression. So removal becomes a loyalty signal, right? Taking this sign down, it says who the city stands with now. The city now stands with gay sex with strangers, drag queens, pride. And the news coverage is just incredibly dishonest. The lived preferences of the residents is completely ignored, right? It's not strange that the residents don't want strangers having sex, soliciting sex, engaging in sex on their street, on their front yard at night, right? That preference is unsayable. Instead, it is recoded as cover for animus and bigotry and homophobia. So why are the preferences of the residents not allowed to be spoken? Right? Because of the power arrangement. There are no elites willing to side with the residents because the elites live in neighborhoods that are so expensive, the prices of the real estate discriminate so that they don't have to. So the lived experience, the lived preference of residents and regular Los Angelinos are just completely ignored in these stories, right? That you don't want strangers having sex and soliciting sex on your street at night. That is not an option for any kind of new coverage, right? That's just cover for bigotry. So a traffic sign, right? It's a low visibility enforcement tool, right? That used to allow the elites to manage conflict without openly choosing sides, right? This allowed cities to suppress antisocial behavior without saying explicitly what behavior they were suppressing. Then one side of the coalition gained power and they forced this symbolic clarity. And the news is sanitized because naming what's really happening here would fracture the elite alliance. Now, the public senses the omission because this unwanted behavior is not vanishing. Only the plain language describing it does. So the more power the elites have, the more sanitized language becomes. The more removed language becomes from reality, right? So elites fight hardest at the point where definition hardens into enforcement, right? Tolerance is cheap, equality is expensive. So tolerant allows dissenters to remain inside the elite as second-order members. But once equality is declared, dissent is no longer a difference of opinion, it's a threat to the coalition. So if you have sufficient power, you can effectively prohibit a plain description of the unwanted behavior.
Massive fraud. Criminal organizations accused of bilking the federal government out of billions in an alleged hospice care scam.
KTLA 5 Samantha Cortese is live in the news center with the story. Sam.
Hi, Sharon, Micah. The FBI is helping federal and state officials look into these scams. According to investigators, fraudsters would recruit healthy people into their hospice program. Then recruiters or corrupt doctors would line their pockets with millions of taxpayer dollars after the hospice claims got paid out. Feds say alleged fraud in Minnesota pales in comparison to the level of fraud they believe is occurring here in California.
No one is guarding the hen house.
At a news conference in downtown Los Angeles, U.S. Attorney Bill Asalee and Dr. Mehmet Oz, who oversees Medicare and Medicaid, said his agency is auditing California's Medicaid system and does not like what it's finding.
Individuals who maybe hadn't thought of defrauding the government to realize this is pretty easy to do.
Oz says his team identified, quote, explosive fraud. He says about $1.3 billion in federal funds were improperly spent on non-emergency care for people who are in the country illegally. And what he calls a crisis, a perverse scheme of fraud in hospice and home health care, particularly in Los Angeles County.
It's not hard to actually go and visit these places if you want to. We should be asking, why haven't we already done this before?
Oz says federal investigators believe criminal organizations, including what he described as foreign-influenced Russian and Armenian gangs, are working with a small number of doctors who he claims falsify records to enroll patients into hospice who are not dying. He said some patients had only high blood pressure or high cholesterol, yet were certified as having less than 6 months to live.
We believe just in LA County, this is a number you will probably not forget for a while. 18% of all of the home health care billing in the entire United States is done here,
totaling an estimated $3.5 billion in hospice and home health care billing, according to CMS. Oz says California will pay back the government for any improperly used federal funding.
We do have actions we can take at the federal level. We intend to very seriously consider it.
Gosh, I wonder exactly who is engaged in this fraudulent behavior. Rather concerning. Right, how much of our economy is fake? So back in the day in Los Angeles, there was a prevalence of cell phone accessory stores, several per block. And Rambo Van Halen drives around and finds all these phony businesses that are just essentially laundering money.
So you can see these are medical buildings. They've got Cyrillic writing, Russian, Armenian writing. On both sides, there's lots of action, it seems. I don't know how many patients are getting care, but in this 4-block area in Los Angeles, there are 42 hospices. So either there are a lot of people dying here, or you've got a fraudulent activity that is so good that everyone wants to get in on it. I'm in Van Nuys in Los Angeles, and this boarded up area above my head here is a big hospice center. There are apparently quite a few hospices around here, 42 within a 4-block radius. And these guys stole $16 million. Listen carefully. The main guy went to jail for 2 years, for stealing $16 million, which is a good trade-off for a lot of folks. And if you look at it, it's pretty indescript. There wasn't anyone really in there. They weren't doing any services. They just got an address they could claim was a hospice. And then they ran the business, claiming people were at home getting services, which they really weren't. What we have learned is there's roughly $3.5 billion of fraud taking place here in Los Angeles in hospice and home care. It's run quite a bit of it by the Russian Armenian mafia. You notice the lettering and language behind me is of that dialect. And it also highlights the fact that this is sort of an organized crime, mafia deal where you've got folks who have systematically recruited doctors to write false prescriptions, hundreds of doctors participating. They've got 100,000 patients who they've tricked or paid to give them their beneficiary numbers so they can perpetuate the fraud. And then the criminals are just running the whole organization and quickly scurrying away when law enforcement does get around to prosecuting them. Unfortunately, in California, there has not been a lot of attention on these problems. That's going to change. The U.S. Attorney, the FBI, everyone's now focused on the fact that in this state, which has about $30 billion worth of home and community-based services, most of it might be fraudulent. Those are big numbers, and we're taking it seriously. The president's not going to tolerate this anymore.
Good. So Frank Fleming says it doesn't seem like Renee Good or Alex Pretti needed to die, but both were engaged in non-normal, insane behavior, right? Driving a car when law enforcement tells you to get out, carrying a gun, while actively getting into fights with law enforcement, right? And the left and the Democrats seem to be encouraging rather than discouraging this behavior.
Focusing a lot this week on these lunatics in Minneapolis and how unattractive they are to a woman. I mean, it's like a Karen intifada that we're watching on the streets of Minneapolis. You and I talked about it. And they're all unattractive. They're like very overweight. They desperately need some Accutane.
A Karen intifada. That's hilarious.
I just there's a lot going on there. And I feel like I can say this because while I look fine now, I was also an unattractive woman at some point in my life, especially around the middle school years, like the 7th, 8th, 9th. Going into 9th, I decided to try harder. But I was overweight. I did have bad acne. I had a big space between my 2 front teeth, which my dad encouraged me to keep. He was like, Lauren Bacall, look at her. This is kind of a sexy, nice, beautiful thing. Yeah. I was like, Dad, I'm out of here. So I got it.
When he said Lauren Bacall, you should have said Mike Tyson. And at least fired back.
I had no idea who Lauren Bacall was. I was 12. So anyway, I had some issues. There's no question. But my experience is you can work on those issues. And then if you get slightly more attractive, your life gets better. It really does. It starts from within. You start to feel better about yourself. You start getting better responses from the outside world, which...
All right, makes excellent sense to me. There's a segment of Decoding the Gurus, there, part 2 on Scott Galloway and peak masculinity, and they talk about what women want, which is a topic after my own heart. What do women want?
I think I've ever introduced.
Way. Yes, you remember
that's a concern. That's concerning, really, isn't it?
Yes. And then I was highlighting that Scott Galloway is generally a left-wing person. So even though he's active in this manosphere territory now, he's not really on board with the typical manosphere stuff. So you hear that come through in some of the things. And you'll hear a little bit of the duality of Scott in this next clip. So yeah, this is a bit about what women actually want, Matt, though, important for us.
I've been wondering about this.
Here's the problem. The right recognize the problem, but unfortunately, I think their answer is coarseness and cruelty, and sometimes conflating masculinity with as a zero-sum game and returning to the 50s. I don't think their vision of masculinity is the right one. The far left's vision of masculinity, their view is the following: men, you don't have a problem, you are the problem. That's not productive. And also, their answer: act more like a woman. That's not the answer.
The main problem is your masculinity.
And what's interesting is that while there's a kind of a public narrative, I think, for many women, I mean, this is anecdotal evidence, but it really is true. I'm not making this up. Women will consistently ask, how can they meet men at my age? A woman who's divorced at my age, the pool of available men is really tiny. And they'll say to me, do you have anyone you could set me up with? And about half the time, they'll say something along the lines, by the way, and they look around and they go, I like a masculine man. Because their narrative and their outward facing is they want a sensitive man. I mean, it's a snarky joke, but I think it's somewhat accurate. Do you really want a sensitive man? That just leaves 2 of you in the car crying and the parking spot empty. And that is snarky and it's sexist, but I think there's some truth to that. I think women are drawn to men who demonstrate some of the traditional attributes of masculinity, despite this public narrative that I really just want a sensitive man, a man in touch with his feelings.
You know, I often demonstrate my masculinity by reverse parking in a single turn, Matt. People swoon at my parking prowess.
Yeah.
Papa, when I grow up, can I park like you? Yeah, son, I'll teach you.
So the more prestigious your position in society, the more vulnerable you are to cancellation. And when there are these established speech codes to demonstrate that you're a member of the elite and you start violating these codes, right, people start getting peeled away from key networks, being denied credentials, careers, and eventually their legal standing. So individuals not necessarily expelled all at once. First, they are socially isolated, then they are professionally sidelined, then they are institutionally excluded, and each step raises the cost of resistance for those still inside. So coalitions survive by making defection so visibly costly and loyalty so visibly rewarding. And the elite institutions are the ruling elites, alliances, enforcement organs, universities, media, professions, law, philanthropy. These are not neutral arenas. They are sorting machines. So once the elite perspective is elevated to reality-defining status, these institutions coordinate implicitly. You don't need a conspiracy. Everyone understands the direction of travel, and careers and speech self-corrects. So when a cultural definition is settled, when speech codes are settled at the elite level, then law follows. Because when there is an elite consensus, coalition is no longer needed. You no longer need to persuade, right? You already have power. So elite conflicts feel existential and moralized because they're not really about policy outcomes. They are about power and control, precisely the power to define and reference reality. So whoever defines reality controls who is respectable, who is employable, who is promotable, and who is protected. So it's not just a fight over ideas, right? It's a fight for position in an alliance. Ideas are just a weapon for your position in the alliance. Ideas are the weapon, institutions are the terrain, social death is the sanction. And so these news stories just completely sanitize what was going on in these residential streets and why people didn't want strangers having sex on their residential streets and on their front yards, right? And the news stories just completely sanitize this, right, for a specific rhetorical and alliance purpose. So the visceral reality of public sex and neighborhood disorder and spread of disease is just completely airbrushed out of these stories. So we have a messy conflict over behavior, but a clean moral debate about discrimination. And journalists love this approach because they get to avoid the graphic nature of the complaints and they get to frame the story within a modern progress narrative. So residents of Silver Lake, they faced a reality that the traffic signs didn't truly capture. Right? When people live in a neighborhood with merry-go-round or cruising circuits, right, the conflict means noise, loss of privacy, and the entire transformation of a residential street into a marketplace for anonymous sexual encounters. Right? You've got kids, you've got families, you care about yourself. You don't want anonymous sex going on up and down your streets and on your front yard. So residents may use neutral language like traffic congestion or noise complaints. That's a social maneuver. They get to advocate for their quality of life without appearing intolerant. But anyone in the know knows that there is an underlying target, a specific group of people who are engaging in anonymous sex on a residential street. And the media coverage is focused on the removal of these signs. What a victory for the LGBTQ alliance. But it just glosses over why we have these signs in the first place. Right, there's such a dramatic disconnect between the reality, the historical record of these residential grievances, and the contemporary celebration of inclusive streets, right? The reality of people having sex on a residential street, soliciting sex on a residential street, selling sex on a residential street, right? That's a difficult, uncomfortable topic for your standard journalist to handle without alienating viewers or appearing biased. So they prefer to pivot to the unremarkable specificity of removing a traffic sign. So this is a fight over who has the power to define reality, right? It's not a fight over discrete policies or even behavior. It is a fight over who gets to define reality, who gets to define what is normal, what is harmful. Right? Moral language is a sorting mechanism. It tells people what side they're on, what side they must abandon if they want to remain in good standing. Then once the definition hardens, facts do not matter anymore. All that matters for you socially and for your place in the alliance is, do you affirm the elite frame of reality? And if you don't, you will get peeled away. You lose your job, you'll lose your privileges, you'll lose your social standing. And resistance becomes irrational at the individual level, even if it's popular at the mass level, because the repercussions for not aligning with the elite perspective is so dramatic.
Did you the ways? There's now a little camera on the back, and I just hold the lines.
My wife is constantly impressed at me not having to rotate the map when I.
Oh yeah.
The maps don't exist anymore. We all use iPhones, so that's not even real. I can't back that up. Well, okay. I guess that's true-ish at the beginning when he's talking about, like, the stereotypical what the left thinks an ideal man is versus what the right does. But I think there's a caveat there, which is that that's a kind of far spectrum stereotype. I think there are a lot of people, whatever, left of center or right of center, or, in the big creamy middle of whatever, for whom their conception of what roles are and gender roles and who pays on a date and whether the man should be brave and strong.
So denial of jobs, denial of access to elite institutions and networks is not some kind of minor side effect. It is the enforcement mechanism. So alliances control jobs, credentials, platforms, publishing, and prestige. And if you lose a definitional fight, right, it means that you and people like you are peeled away. So this is why these conflicts feel existential, right? The force of the law comes last, not first. So cultural victory precedes legal victory. Once reality is defined, then the law will tend to ratify what elite networks already treat as settled. So legal coercion feels shocking to the losing side because they experience the earlier stages as just social and cultural conflict, not as war. Right? Compromise is impossible. You cannot partially lose the power to define reality. Right? Either your description of the world is authoritative, or your description of the world is sick, it's pathologized, it's primitive, it's bigoted, it's racist, it's sexist, it's homophobic. Right? Elites see these shifts as moral progress. People outside the elite experience them as sudden civilizational defeat. So this is never about tolerance versus intolerance. It's about who has the power to say what reality is, who gets to say what words mean, what institutions reward, and what codes people must adapt or disappear socially. Right? This is the mechanism of status closure. This is how the elite reshape social norms. So you get a news story framing a no cruising sign as a relic of bigotry rather than a rational response to a neighborhood disorder. So the elite is exercising their power to define reality. The sanitization of the news stories is a tool of power to ensure that certain perspectives, particularly those of the deplorable or the non-elite, are pushed out. So you remove every single graphic, unpleasant detail of the behavior that residents protest and the reason they want the signs. And so you get to transform a local dispute over public conduct on a residential street into a high-level moral victory for equality. And if you lose this cultural fight, it means that you have the weight of the state and elite institutions and eventually police and employers against you. Right? And so the sanitized news coverage signals which side of this fight has won. Where does the dominant culture side? So if the news reported on the actual nature of the cruising, the public sex, the disruption of domestic life, it would validate the residents' desire for the signs. But by focusing on the homophobia, right, the news coverage gets to undermine the legitimacy of those who simply want quiet, orderly residential streets. And so you have to rewrite history. So society may have tolerated this behavior, but then neighborhoods want to restore equality of life, so they get signs and they get public policing to restore the quality of life. But now wanting to have a quality of life where there isn't an orgy of anonymous sex going on your residential street, well, that's an act of bigotry, right? The material and social and legal benefits of the city of Los Angeles are now fully aligned with the LGBTQ community and are aligned against residents who want high quality of life. And so many people know things that they can't articulate. Well, they can't articulate using elite language, right? We all operate with tacit knowledge, right? We all operate on the basis of a bedrock of shared, unarticulated understanding of reality. That allows us to navigate our life. Right? The residents of these streets had a shared reality that they didn't want orgies going on their residential streets. And so they eventually pushed for law enforcement to protect their quality of life. Now, the elites come in, such as the news media and politicians and NGOs, and they get to define reality, right? The tacit knowledge of ordinary people is pushed aside. We have the elites will rule, and ordinary residents and their desire for quiet streets and quality of life and protection, right? That is just shoved aside. Right, the local uncodified feelings of residents of these neighborhoods have absolutely no standing and no power against the formal universal values of the current professional managerial class with their elite educations. So now the state moves in and uses its power to correct history, to redefine reality. So practices such as cruising and orgies move from a social fact that the community is trying to manage to now it's a political right that the state protects. And old community norms that we don't want orgies on our residential street are rendered obsolete. So the removal of this piece of metal, this traffic sign, it is a ritual of the state asserting its power to define what is real and what is right. And the original neighborhood concerns are not just ignored, they are completely written out of the narrative because they do not fit the formal moral logic of the new authority. So now we have the triumph of these explicit rules passed by the elite over the tacit understandings of the residents. So the news effectively peels away the ability of people to argue for why they want quality of life and public order on their own terms. Right? If you can't mention the orgies, the public sex, the disgusting, revolting behavior, the disruption of the street without being called a bigot and a homophobe, right? You no longer have the ability to resist the removal of the sign and law enforcement against orgies on your street. So now the elite moral mandate is the only reality permitted in the public square. And the messy, disgusting, visceral history of the street is now replaced by a clean, state-approved version of events. Isn't that wonderful? So nice.
And so on. Like, I just don't think it's all... I don't think there's a unified, okay, this is what everyone who's left of center agrees, this is how men should be. You know, that's my caveat. I'd add to that.
He did say far left. He did say,
did
like,
he? Okay,
yeah, he did.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
He did, and he is speaking. You know, he's kind of like acknowledging stereotypes. But like for me, the interesting thing is like he is clearly saying, look, the right wing answer isn't the right one.
Yeah, he's very clear about that.
It's a little bit, you know, Matt. It's in line with us. It's Alan Partridge.
So most of what we know, most of what people know, is unsayable. It's local. It is situational. It is geographically and socially bound, and it's impossible to fully capture in words. Then you get state and elite institutions stepping in to formalize all sorts of practices and destroy a community's own cognitive authority, their own practices, their own traditions, their own forms of tacit meaning, unspoken knowledge, their own prepositions. So the neighborhood used to practice self-regulation that we don't want orgies on our street, and they would use signs as a proxy for a shared understanding that this is a residential street. We don't want stranger orgies going on here. But now the elite swoop in, the media, the city government sanitizes the history, sanitizes the reality, and completely strips the residents of the streets of their status as legitimate observers of their own lives. We can't trust people to observe their own lives because they lack the education.
I'm mad as hell that I want something in the middle. That's the message. But
what about the last bit, Chris? What do women want? Do you think that's...
masculine men?
Yeah, do you think that's
masculine
fair?
men? Well, some of them do, but you know, in general, with this conversation, one of the things is like, you can't say you're like a masculine man, and I'm like, can you not? like I don't understand who it is that's not allowed to profess that.
So the news media increasingly uses elite speech rather than street speech. We increasingly have the displacement of the tacit, right, the traditional, right, the local. So we have the news and the elite sweeping in, and they use the language of the elite, the language of the university, the language of sociology and human rights, rather than the language and the knowledge of the street. They replace the visceral front lawn orgies, right, with abstract concepts such as discriminatory infrastructure. So now the power to define reality rests only with those who have mastered the formal jargon of the academy, right? The person who just wants strangers to stop having sex on his front yard is silenced because he lacks the authorized language to compete with the elite progress narrative. So the state uses its expert status to delegitimize any dissent, any contrary understanding of reality. We have one elite group that gets to define a specific truth, and then they close the status of anyone who disagrees, and they don't get a voice. So no cruising signs are now just exclusively tools of hate. And the resident who points out the disorder and the unwanted orgies, he's not just expressing a preference, he's making a factual error in the eyes of the state. Right? This is the weight of the dominant culture. It means the truth of the ordinary resident is rendered invisible. It is labeled a prejudice or an excuse. Right? And that's why you get these ceremonies of removing any constraints against orgies on residential streets. Right? The elite consensus is consolidated, and the removal of these signs now becomes a state-sponsored performance of its own moral authority. Right? The government, the media, and the elite define the reality now. And what's really happened, the unsanitized history, must be ignored. So the elite swoop in, and we're expected to abide by the elite speech consensus because they are neutral, right? They depoliticize what are actually deep political social conflicts, right? Some people want to hook up with strangers on a residential street, and then residents of that street don't want that. We have a fundamental conflict of interest, but it's no longer treated as a genuine disagreement between two groups with competing interests. Instead, we have a technical and moral error that luckily expertise has moved in and corrected. So by labeling the signs as discriminatory, we get to move this conflict out of the realm of ordinary human, political, local negotiation, where residents might argue for their rights to privacy and order, and now we get a realm where only experts on civil rights and urban planning have a say. Right? The local experience is unspeakable in polite society. So we have a closed system of logic. So any frank talk about the unwanted stranger sex going on your front yard, well, that's just a purely symbolic expression of hate. So the resident's complaint about the public cess is just a rationalization of his bigotry and homophobia. The expert swoops in and he says, I understand the resident's true bigoted motive better than the resident does, right? This is the ultimate exercise of power. This is the ability to tell a community that their own stated reasons for their actions are a lie. So thank God for the rule of experts and the destruction of local authority, right? We used to have longtime residents saying, we don't want orgies on our street. We don't want that behavior on our street. But now the modern elites rule. So this personal residential authority is replaced by procedural authority. At least we went through the proper bureaucratic procedures. We can ignore the residents' voices, and we can focus on the statements of city council members and street departments and PhD students and NGOs and LGBTQ representatives. They will swoop in. They'll manage our lives for us. They will suppress the messy realities of our life. And we can just turn over everything to them because they have expertise and they are independent. So experts cannot allow visceral, accurate details of the conflict to remain in the narrative because these details provide a counter logic to expert elite rule. So if the public knows the mess and horror of stranger orgies going on this residential street, the constant noise and indecency and filth and contamination, right, then the experts' claim to expertise and to authority and that these protests by the residents are only about hatred and bigotry, then the case for expertise is diminished. So reality must be sanitized to protect the expert elite authority, right? The elites get to define reality. They get to carefully select which facts are allowed to survive the editing process. So the state's eventual intervention is both necessary and moral.
They like whatever. I don't know, a lumberjack, a fireman, right? Or whatever. But like, I do know that at the extreme ends of that, like the bodybuilder physique, I believe that is more appealing to men. Other men are more impressed by that than women are. So, but I'm not saying the overall like masculinity being an attractive or the kind of stereotypical, what's his name from A Streetcar Named Desire? What do you call him?
I don't know.
You know,
So thank God we live in the age of expertise. Stephen Turner writes about this in his terrific book, Liberal Democracy 3.0, Civil Society in an Age of Experts. So we have entered an era where the authority of the expert takes over and dissolves the authority of the community and the lived experiences and regular expressions of regular residents and citizens. We need to take politics more and more out of the hands of citizens and give it into the hands of these disinterested, independent experts. Right? We get increasing epistemic inequality. Right? Only the expert, the sociologist, the city official, the journalist, the activist has true knowledge. Right? They have a superior way of knowing reality, and the residents experience their local knowledge, their tacit knowledge. This is primitive. This is biased. This is all a type of bigotry that must be managed by more enlightened rule. So communities that develop norms built on unstated knowledge, tacit knowledge, the unwritten skill of living together, right, that is being disrupted and overridden by expert knowledge. Right? This local autonomy is dangerous. It's irrational. It's bigoted. It's homophobic. We need the elites to fix these problems, replace local self-regulation with bureaucratic procedural authority. And we need to sanitize the details, because if the public were allowed to see the unsanitized reality, the stranger orgies on a residential street, right, then the elite's expert-driven progress narrative would lose its authority. So now we get to have the state and the media redescribing facts to fit their preferred political and moral outcome. Right? The resident might say, I don't want strangers having sex on my street, but the expert will redescribe this as anxiety over shifting demographic norms, or it's a legacy of discriminatory spatial control. Right? The experts have the tools to take ground away from the community. Now, the resident has to argue on the expert's terms, and if you cannot speak the language of the expert, the language of equity and urban sociology, right, your lived experience is disinformation or prejudice, and the force of law will then codify the expert's description into reality. So you'll get the ceremonial removal of science. So this reliance on experts will transform liberal democracy from a government by discussion among citizens into a contest over expertise. And we have a victory lap for the experts who use their power of the state to override local memory.
You mean, but I don't know.
Why am I asking you a name? The guy that says Stella.
Yeah, that guy. That guy.
He became fat. Like, I know everything about him. He was in the island of Dr. Moreau.
Yeah, don't worry. Everyone knows who you mean. It's fine.
Marlon Brando.
I think that's broadly true. Like, my wife gives me a pat on the back if I go swimming and I stay in shape, because she would like to see more upper body strength. She thinks that is better than the alternative, which is, I guess, a form of masculinity, right? Here's the thing, though. I think it's all dependent. I mean, like, the reason why I hesitate is not out of any kind of political niceties or anything. It's just that there is, like, a lot of cultural diversity in it. And what I mean by that is, like the kind of, like, Wuthering Heights type moody, emo, character. Like, that's a type, right? That chicks dig.
So Adam Smith noted in his 1776 book, Wealth of Nations, that men of business seldom get together without engaging in a conspiracy against the public, and it's also true for the professions. So here's a list of the top 10 money-making but unnecessary procedures frequently pushed by dentists. Right, here's the Dental Hall of Fame. Hall of Shame, 10 revenue-driven rituals. You might be told you need an aggressive deep cleaning with scaling and root planning. Great profit center, not necessarily something you need. You need to replace aging fillings with something much more expensive. And if you can take out the old filling, right, and drill it out, you will weaken the tooth's structural integrity, and you'll start a cycle of replacement that leads to a crown, which will provide even more money for a dentist. You need a prophylactic wisdom tooth extraction, right? It doesn't just cause pain, open you up to infection. It generates billions of dollars. So sometimes these extractions prevent future problems, but often they are simply a window of opportunity for making money. Right, you might need an adult dental sealant, right? And you can trap existing decay underneath the plastic coating, leading to massive cavity that goes undetected until it reaches the nerve. And then you need some very expensive dental procedure. Incipient cavity drilling, right? If we need to drill, we need to fill. Once you drill into a tooth, it is permanently compromised and will require larger fillings every 10 to 15 years. You need full coverage crowns, right? The tooth has a cavity, and the conservative dentist might just use an onlay, but a production dentist jumps straight into a crown because it's much more profitable. You need a very expensive night guard, $500, $800, when you could buy one just as good for $15 off of Amazon. You need cosmetic veneers, which are very likely to destroy your teeth. You need 3D imaging x-rays. You need a fluoride varnish at the end of your cleaning. So why do we have all these scam procedures? Because of an information asymmetry. A patient cannot see the shadow on the x-ray that the dentist claims is a cavity. So by framing every minor observation as a finding that requires intervention, the dentist satisfies his desire for profit. The ritual isn't just about money. It's also about the dentist's status as a proactive healthcare provider, not just a passive observer of natural aging.
Some chicks, right? At some point in time, right? And by some standards, that kind of romantic poet type is not very masculine, right? But by other metrics, it is, right? And other women like different things. So I
Dentists overall probably have the most suspect economic model and recommendations.
You can walk out of the dentist's office with a truly beautiful smile without even fully realizing that everything you just had done was simply and utterly pointless. And you wasted your money for nothing. The truth is, there are certain procedures that, if you ignore them, you end up wasting your valuable time, your hard-earned money, and sometimes even harming your own precious teeth. Today, I'm going to reveal a comprehensive list of such important procedures so you can effectively protect your dental health and your beautiful smile, your budget, and most importantly, your health. Let's start with the first manipulation.
Okay, that sound quality sucks, but the idea is strong.
I think it's just a little bit complicated, right?
Well, yeah, and I live in Japan, Matt, in case you didn't remember. And here, for example, there are these establishments called host bars where people, women, majoritively, go to be flirted with and talked to by attractive men, right? And the men in those bars are not grizzled, masculine type men, right? They're in good shape, but they're generally what people would regard in the West as like pretty boys.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, softer, milder. Yeah, that's a type, and a lot of people like that. Yeah, so this is why I hesitate.
Some people like Yankees. Some people like the Yankee type.
Yeah,
right? You know?
And like exactly the same is true for men, right? Like not every man thinks, okay, this stereotypical ultra feminine blonde bombshell type thing who's always making her hair pretty and wearing a lot of makeup. Like that's not every guy's idea of what they want, right?
No, but I think the general thing is just they're saying, like, if you look at broad trends or whatever, if you look at studies about attraction, women prefer masculine typefaces and stuff.
Okay, what are the top 10 unnecessary surgeries? Knee arthroscopy for osteoarthritis, spinal fusion for nonspecific back pain, hysterectomies for benign conditions, prophylactic oophorectomies where they remove the ovaries for no good reason, stenting for stable coronary artery disease, C-sections, then all sorts of unnecessary surgical cuts during childbirth, otherwise known as episiotomy, tonsillectomies, prostatectomies for low-risk cancer, gallbladder removal for non-specific pain. So not everything that a professional wants you to do is necessarily aligned with your interests.
But like again, I just feel like you are allowed to say that. You are. I've seen tons of studies published about it and whatever. But okay, so that's what he's saying.
I mean, what he's getting at, trying to be as charitable as possible. But before I am charitable, Chris, the other thing too is I'm looking at my daughter's taste in boyfriends, and she's definitely got a type, definitely physically fit, definitely good looking, and so on. But these young guys, they're not the grizzled.
Are you saying they're not they're masculine, man?
I don't know what generation they are, even Zoomers, but I don't know. They're more the pretty boy type, and that's fine too, right? Whatever. But I'm trying to be charitable here, and I think what he's talking to is some sort of politicized conception of what men should be like, or what women should be like, or whether both genders should be as androgynous as possible, and. Yeah, no.
They're complaining about toxic masculinity, aren't they? I mean, they're complaining that is, traditional male stereotypes, hurly-burly types are now regarded as, dinosaurs. That's old-fashioned. Nobody really likes that, but they're saying actually, secretly, people do want men to be, muscly and rude.
Yeah, I think what he was talking to is being stoic and not necessarily sharing all of their feelings.
Oh yeah, that's right. Stoic.
Yeah, and
not crying in the car. But,
So I got breaking news here. The shooters of Alex Pretti were placed on administrative leave. Right? Why were there yesterday dozens of news stories, including the top story at the New York Times about the ICE and border agents in the shooting of Alex Pretti were placed on administrative leave? Of course, they were placed on administrative leave. Lasts about 3 days. It's paid. And it always happens when law enforcement officers shoot someone. It's not news. It always happens. But this is dominating the news yesterday. So why? And here is the most concise explanation. It comes from 1984 communications professor Sandra Brahman. She wrote, "News is the passage of bureaucratically recognized events through administrative procedures." So why does this completely normal, expected bureaucratic event dominate news coverage, right? Because it's the one official action the reporters can point to right away. The entire news business depends upon official pieces of paper because you can't be sued for reporting what official pieces of paper say. It anchors the narrative. It signals accountability without any judgment. And it's a way to try to provide evidence that you're advancing the story, even though you're not. So it's completely normal. It's always standard protocol, and it's just repeated endlessly in the news because it's the clearest official statement available, and media outlets want to anchor everything to official reports, right?
Like Jordan Peterson.
Yeah. Do women want maybe Jordan Peterson is he the archetype of what women want? Who knows? I don't know. It seems like such a I don't know how to talk about.
So the news media prefers frames that support their particular alliance. So reporting that the agents have been placed on leave, it's a narrative anchor around which all the messy sides of the story can be organized: the protest, the condemnation, the defense, the policy demands, the cause for investigation. Right? Here's a neutral fact. And you lead with that, and it makes you sound as though you want to be objective. And it also keeps the conversation flowing. So it's a ritual signal. Coalitions need visible responses to maintain their legitimacy, right? If the agents had not been placed on leave, critics would scream cover up. So by highlighting the leave, the media signal their support for our institutions, that the institution acknowledges that something serious happened and that an investigation is underway, and it maintains the appearance that the system, which the news media is a part, is being accountable. Right? And this serves both the establishment and the opposition factions. So centrists can say, oh, this leave is standard, don't overread. Progressives can say leave is necessary but not sufficient. Conservatives can say, oh, we got due process here. So everyone in the broader alliance, in the broad elite and partisan ecosystem, can cite the same factual statement to then go in their divergent ways. So this type of routine news story is a signal, and it's necessary when an alliance comes under stress, right? Nothing surprising here, but at a high pressure moment, it's a reassurance device. It's a way to deal with all the tension and conflict, and it allows news organizations to appear neutral and relevant. We have a polarized environment. We have outrage narratives circulating on all sides. So stating that the agents were placed on leave, right, you get to give a straightforward, objective update rather than a judgment. So you get to keep both sides of the audience engaged. So you put a routine administrative detail at the top of coverage. It's not about the intrinsic news value. It's about providing a shared reference point around which the diverse audience coalitions can coordinate meaning, signal their allegiance, manage their outrage, and preserve institutional legitimacy. All right, bureaucratically recognized events means events do not become news because they are surprising or important. They become news when an institution has acknowledged them. An arrest, a suspension, investigation, administrative leave. All right, these are all alliance handshakes. So journalism is not primarily about facts. It's about tracking how power moves. News is the visible movement of power. News is the narrative of how power moves through various legitimacy granting channels. So once a bureaucracy touches it, the event becomes safe to report. Before that, it's just rumor or noise. So routine procedures become headlines, not because they inform, but it's a signal that the institution has recognized something has happened and they have activated an internal ritual, and the ritual reassures people. And the procedures don't just recognize events, they also allocate moral standing. Saying that you're being investigated means you are still inside the system, right? Saying that you've been suspended says the system is performing accountability. And then if you are charged, it means the system has selected you as a sacrificial boundary. So each step in the bureaucratic process, each step in the movement of power answers the question, who is still protected and who is now exposed? This is why modern news feels empty and relentless, right? The facts, the event, the reality matters less than the bureaucratic trajectory. The story is not what happened. The story is who acknowledged it, which institution acknowledged it, which office touched it, which process was triggered. Does that process satisfy the expectations of various audiences? This is why the media obsess over process updates, reviews launched, leave granted, probe expanded, charges considered, right? These are all alliance maintenance bulletins. Right? They tell readers that which institution is coordinating with other institution and which norms still hold. So when bureaucracies were thinner and slower, this type of passage felt more consequential. Today, the administrative state is dense and performative. Everything passes through procedures immediately, and so journalism reports on these procedures as though it means something deep and meaningful. Right, this is the skeleton. The muscle behind the skeleton is alliance theory. Which parts of the alliance are being served? So alliance theory provides us the muscle and the nerve endings. News is not about events. It's about the process of power.
This topic
Calm down, Mike. Calm down. It's all right. You're allowed. Look at you getting all flustered.
I don't know what.
It's fine.
I don't know what women want. This is fun. I've never known that.
Look, I'm saying in this, you're allowed to say what Scott Galloway said. It's fine. You didn't need to whisper.
It is fine. Yeah, that's fine.
It's okay. Now, to highlight the
chat wants me to bring Kip on. I can't bring Kip on. I live in a society, and Kip chooses to flip both the middle fingers at society, and so I just can't have him on. It's bad for me.
the duality more of Scott, the kind of different solutions he has. So we heard some of his tax solutions, right? He talked a little bit about that. This is another solution he has, which is a little bit different. So let's see what you think about this one.
It's a problem from the inside. That it's the enemy within. It's your neighbor. It's people who are challenging a current orthodoxy, that they're the enemy. And I think America would really benefit from all young people serving in the agency of their country and having a chance to see what, if you go out in the U.S., if you walk the streets of Austin, if you meet people, if you walk the streets where I live in New York or Florida or Colorado, I can't get over how wonderful other Americans are. Because unfortunately, I'm extremely online. And I believe that's what America is. And the reality is it's not. It's algorithms lifting up the shittiest part of America and Americans.
Misrepresenting it.
And the really unfortunate thing about AI is it's crawling online. It's not crawling the real world. So I think getting young people out to serve in the agency of their country, it would disproportionately benefit men who, quite frankly, at the age of 18, as the father of two boys, I know this, a lot of them aren't ready for college. They're still dopes. And they're just not ready. So I think a lot of these kids would benefit from 2 years. And by the way, it doesn't have to be military. It can be helping seniors. It can be a smoke jumper. It can be clearing brush for a fire. It can be health, whatever it might be, taking care of our national parks. But meeting different kids from different regions, ethnicities, sexual orientations, and realizing how fortunate they are to be in America.
Let me just contextualize a little bit there, Matt. So he was...
So law enforcement officers everywhere in the developed world are put on paid leave after they discharge their weapons. Now, how this is presented differs by country. So in Australia, it's framed as a mandatory health and safety requirement for the employee. So why has Australia become so obsessed with psychology and therapy, so much so it even becomes mandated, right? I grew up in Australia, born there in 66, left there in 77. And I grew up in Australia where going to a psychiatrist or a therapist was exceedingly rare. So we have had an inversion of the stoic Aussie culture, and it's been increasingly replaced, certainly among the elites and the professional class, with a clinical therapeutic framework. So for most of Australia's history, the Aussie ideal was the stiff upper lip, right? Self-reliance and emotional repression. Then starting in 2006, there was a massive policy shift called Better Access Initiative, where therapy was moved from a niche, expensive service for the worried to a subsidized mainstream medical necessity. And Australia now has at least as many, if not more, psychotherapists per capita than the United States. So what the heck is going on here? Well, elite rule says that we need to give more and more power to the psychology profession. They became really good at making their case. And if your mental health elite can medicalize ordinary human sadness, then they have many more opportunities to make money and many more opportunities to gain status. Now, ordinary human sadness should not be medicalized and pathologized. There are all sorts of healthy, evolutionarily adaptive reasons why you get depressed, right? If you fail, get humiliated, lose your job, lose your spouse, lose standing, lose income, lose friends, you should feel bad so that you can then retreat from life and consider how you've been living, plot a new path forward, think about the likely results if you go down this new path, and then perhaps discard one new path, think of another. And this is all healthy and evolutionarily adaptive. But now we have the medicalization of ordinary human sadness because it serves the interests of people in the mental health profession. It gets them more income and more social status. And so there are all sorts of practices, mental health practices, that do far more harm than good, but they get mandated, such as after a crisis, after some traumatic event, for police and for many other people, they have to go talk about it with a therapist. And this is clearly bad, right? Talking about trauma reactivates the trauma. The evidence is overwhelming that this force talk therapy following a trauma is often harmful. So the evidence is overwhelming. This force talk therapy is harmful. It interferes with natural recovery, but it is increasingly mandated, even though the evidence is overwhelming, that it's harmful. Why? Because people in power mandate it, right? The professional managerial class uses their power, uses their credentials to define what is true and good and legitimate. And this professional managerial class creates all these bureaucratic rituals to protect and advance their own interests, even when this goes against the public interest. So here are 20 bureaucratic rituals that cause far more harm than good. So number one, this mandatory critical incident stress debriefing, right? Forcing trauma victims to process their feelings immediately after an event tends to lock in traumatic memories. It interrupts natural recovery. It increases PTSD risk, but it provides income for social workers, and it allows an institution to say they provided immediate care. Putting in stents for stable heart disease, right? Great money maker. Does more harm than good. Overprescription of opioids, routine radical mastectomies, implicit bias and equity training, credential inflation in social work and education, defensive referrals to coroners and specialists, unnecessary medical tests and radiographic studies, standardized testing as a primary measure of teacher quality, medicalizing childbirth, corporate performance review, right? You likely find your annual performance review at best useless, but it is a vital technology for the professional managerial class. They get to create a paper trail that then allows the corporation, the firm, to fire you with cause later on, even if the metrics used are completely arbitrary and have no impact on company productivity. So why do we keep doing all these useless rituals? Because they serve the interests of the professional managerial class who have a great deal of power. So if everyone in the professional managerial elite agree that procedure X is the definition of good practice, then anyone who fails to do procedure X is an outcast. So the social worker who says, leave the victim alone to talk to their friends, is seen as negligent. The social worker performs a harmful debriefing, is dedicated. The bureaucracy, the professional managerial class consistently reward intervention even when it does far more harm than good.
Recommending like mandatory military service as a solution to help people learn to be better rounded people and get their masculine urges out and whatnot.
But I think a lot of the problem would be solved by just programs that would be available to both men and women. I think the biggest, for example, if I could pick one program, it'd be mandatory national service. And it wouldn't just be for men, it'd be for men and women, similar to what they do in Israel.
Because it allows you to, as a man, display competence, prestige. It makes you more attractive as a mate when you come out of that. It teaches you a lot of skills about orderliness and conscientiousness. It allows you to get your shit together. It gives you lineage and a path toward making your life better.
And this was an elaboration on that point, right? That men and boys need to do, like, voluntary service for society before they can mature.
It's kind of an old idea, isn't it? Like they had the Peace Corps, right? That was the thing in the US. Wasn't that a similar thing to what he's talking about? And like in Australia, we have a thing called Australian Volunteers Abroad where, you know, you can go overseas and do a bit of volunteering. And so, you know. All
right, you can get a full decoding of Scott Galloway there on the decoding the gurus. Is Megyn Kelly talking with Adam Carolla.
Builds additional confidence. And so I'm kind of tongue in cheek on these women, but not totally. Like, I actually do think if they would try a little harder and get a man into their lives, thanks to point one, they'd be happier and they'd be less likely to be causing havoc on the streets of Minneapolis.
Well, I think about that a lot too, and I have a little history with it because I hosted Loveline for 10 years, and I spoke to a lot of like young women who were going through things, you know, mostly weird hatred for the dad. So there's a big problem with the daughters and the dads, and they hate their dads. And when women hate their dads, they will take it with them into the future relationships, future situations. I can't tell you how many airports I've gone through in America with a young woman who hated her dad sort of yelling at me about my bag or something. And I'm like, I have no idea why you're angry or what I represent, but I realize I represent her dad, essentially.
So why does the professional managerial class insist on all these destructive rituals? Right? Because this is a process by which they secure their own economic and social status. Right? This is the operation of status closure. This is how they restrict access to resources and opportunities to just certain narrow list of eligible candidates. Right? And this is licensing, this is standards of care. And if a practitioner deviates from these established bureaucratic rituals, even if these rituals are clearly harmful, they will lose professional standing, right? The alliance of the board, the firm, the profession is more important than the truth. When a practitioner tries to favor restraint or tries to favor evidence over intervention, the professional managerial class will use its levers to push them out. There will be the standard of care trap. So in medical and legal malpractice law, the standard of care is not defined by what works best. It is defined by what the majority of peers do. So if 90% of social workers are doing harmful debriefings, then doing a debriefing is the legal standard. A practitioner refuses to do one is legally exposed, even if they are scientifically correct. The administrative review. Bureaucracies use peer review committees to police the boundaries of the profession. These are status protection squads. So if a doctor stops performing unnecessary back surgeries, they reduce the hospital's revenue and they challenge the status of their colleagues. So the committee can then find administrative irregularities in that doctor's file to revoke their privileges. And there's the credentialing ladder. By constantly raising the minimum credential for a role, right, the professional managerial class ensures that everyone in the field has been thoroughly socialized into the preferred rituals. And people have an increasingly massive sunk cost into the system that mandates the harmful interventions. So when a professional such as a doctor makes a mistake, regulatory boards tend to focus more on the practitioner's insight than the mistake, right? This is a secular confession ritual. So to keep their license, the professional must acknowledge their flawed self. They must admit guilt in a way that satisfies the board's psychological criteria. And if you disagree with the board's framing, you lack insight. You get permanently barred regardless of your skill. Peer support models will be overwhelmed by the broader mental health industrial complex. Clinical psychologists will argue that your peers are not qualified to assess your trauma, even though the data shows that peers often have better outcomes because they share a common language and they share an alliance with the victim. So by framing listening to a mate as unqualified practice, the professional class captures the market. They transform a natural human activity into a billable, destructive service. Right? This is the ultimate victory of the professional managerial class. They take the commons of human empathy and put it behind a paywall of their credentials and bureaucratic procedures. The annual values-based performance review, absolutely useless for productivity, but vital for the professional managerial class. You get to force employees to map their daily task onto vague corporate values, then force the employees to adopt the institution's language. It's a ritual of linguistic submission that then creates a paper trail for future at-will termination. Right. Implicit bias and diversity seminars will likely increase workplace friction, but they are a form of order protection for HR. If a lawsuit occurs, the firm can point to the certificate and say, we did the ritual. And that shields leadership from liability. How about strategic planning retreats? Professional managerial class loves strategic planning retreats. Pull productive people away from productive work to engage in vision exercises. Right? The real purpose of these retreats is to solidify the social alliance of the leaders and to force subordination from everyone else. What about all the routine medical testing for people not at risk? It's a way to make money. And early detection is a high-status professional mantra. And if you don't follow it, then you appear negligent. Organizations will force employees to adopt industry best practices from completely different contexts. They'll ignore local domain knowledge, tacit knowledge in favor of a legible, standardized manual. So this allows the boss to claim he rationalized the office, even if the new system is less efficient than the one it replaced. A multi-tiered approval loop. Simple $500 purchase now requires 5 signatures from people. It's not about saving money. It's about status closure. Every signature is a gatekeeping exercise where people get to assert their place in the hierarchy. Suspension, right? A child with behavioral issues, not just disciplined, they get referred to a battery of specialists for assessment, right? So you create more and more work and income for people in the mental health professions, and it protects the school from liability, and it creates a label on the child for life, creating a lifelong dependency in all likelihood on the mental health industrial complex. Isn't that wonderful?
And we're having this exchange, but I'm not a weary passenger who has a first-class ticket on your airline. I'm sort of a male figure, and I'm white, and I'm 6'2", and maybe I have some money. So I'm all the things she's been trained to hate. And now I come in, and it's payback time for me. And there's an issue with that, taking all these girls that are sort of damaged and have real strong feelings about their dad, who may have abandoned them or he may have molested them. And now we put them at the front of all the lines. They're behind the counter at the airline, they're at the security at LAX, and now a never-ending flow of people who remind them of their dads now is coming through, and now they're in charge.
So what about all the standardized ethics compliance modules, right? Millions of employees, millions of professionals have to spend hours clicking through slides about ethical matters, bribery, conflicts of interest, sexual harassment. And no one becomes more ethical by doing these, but the professional managerial class enforces them, mandates them to transfer risk. So by signing the digital form, you then personally take on the legal burden if the company ever gets caught in a scandal. What about the return to office mandate? Right, the professional managerial class is increasingly mandating a return to the physical office. It's not about productivity, it's about power and legitimacy. Managerial status is hard to maintain without a visible audience to manage. So the office is a theater where the rituals of the professional managerial class are most effectively performed. You have the priority of legibility over efficacy. So a manager can see a signed performance review or a completed diversity certificate. They cannot easily see a healthy, productive office culture or a doctor's quiet, effective restraint. So the bigger the administrative layer grows, the report becomes more real to the institution than the reality. And then there is the issue of action bias. So in a bureaucracy, the person who does something is always seen as more valuable than the person who observes and waits. So the surgeon who operates is a hero. Surgeon who tells a patient that their back pain will resolve with walking is lazy or dismissive. Social worker who mandates a session is proactive. Social worker who suggests a quiet week off is neglectful. So the professional managerial class has an entire status hierarchy around intervention. They get to medicalize sadness, they get to bureaucratize grief because it gives them more income, more status, gives them a reason to exist, and it gives them an opportunity to feel important.
Take your shoes off, give me your backpack. But I just want to continue this. In the aesthetic department, I believe a lot of these women desecrate themselves. It's not even that they're not trying to look good. They realize that it's too much work and they're never going to look how they want to look. And they're not into being the best version of themselves, but even that best version is still sort of a 6. It's not an 8 or a 10. So instead, they aggressively pierce their septum, they dye their hair purple, and they put on 50 pounds, and they literally build a force field around them of people.
We all exert a force field, right? We all affect other people.
Being attracted to them, but they don't even participate. They literally desecrate themselves and take themselves out of the game because the truth is they may be rejected even when they tried, and that would be devastating to them. And now they have an excuse.
You know how there's like fat camps, whatever? I want to create like an attractiveness camp. I really think if you went through my 2-week attractiveness camp, I could turn your life around. It would take some of my friends, some of my team around me. But I'm telling you, like, it's exactly the opposite of what they're thinking. I actually do believe, having spent 14 years at Fox News, you can take anybody. You can take any sow's ear and turn them into a silk purse. I'm telling you, hair and makeup can do a lot.
Yes.
Not to mention a little wardrobe action. Now,
officers then pepper spray both Pretti and the woman and drag Pretti to the ground. Pretti's family. Let's do it. Yeah, well, speaking of Minnesota, this has been making the rounds. A new video of the killing of Alex Pretti shows the interaction between him and a swarm of DHS officers from start to finish, and it batters the credibility of Trump officials who came out of the gate swinging, calling Pretti a domestic terrorist. The video shows Pretti directing traffic before it appears he is asked to move out of the street, which he does. As he walks towards the sidewalk, a DHS officer pushes a woman to the ground. Pretti moves towards her Officers then pepper spray both Pretti and the woman and drag Pretti to the ground. Pretti's family, after the incident, released a statement in the aftermath of the shooting, blasting the Trump administration. The statement reads, in part, the sickening lies told about our son by the administration are reprehensible and disgusting.
All right, so I never thought I would have to say this, but white people don't wrestle with cops. I used to tell my black listenership not to wrestle with cops. Whitey, you're going to get shot too. This is a much worse shooting, I think, than the Good minivan thing. This is worse, although he had a gun and Good didn't have a gun. This one is worse. And he didn't really wrestle with cops. What I'm saying is don't insert yourself into this situation. You could get shot. And then people go, was it a good killing or was it a bad killing? And then they go, oh, that was a bad killing. He shouldn't have been shot. It's like, oh, okay, I'll reanimate his corpse and explain to him that the joke's on the cops. Like, you're still dead. So I would suggest not getting involved. And also, do not underestimate 28-year-old dudes with guns and you calling them Nazis and pigs and spitting on them for 5 hours. Do not underestimate their ability to reach for that gun at some point. It will happen. And then everyone will go, oh, so it's okay? No, it's not okay. It's going to happen. It has to happen. If you go, here's the combination. Here's the stew that I'm cooking. Lots of dudes with guns getting called horrible, horrible things for hours on end. Sometimes bottles thrown at them or snowballs or pushed or spat upon or something. But they got the guns. Hours of that, then mixed with throngs of people, either in cars driving toward them or pushing toward them, or general confusion lots of times. That is going to translate into X amount of citizens getting shot per year. If you just said, this is something we're going to do 24/7 all year long, you'd go, okay, at the end of the year, there's going to be like 26 people shot. And then you go, is that right? It's like, no, it's not right. Those guys have guns. You antagonize them for long periods of time. Scuffles break out. And then, as they say, shit happens. That's how this works. And it's going to work. And by the way, it'll keep going in different iterations. You know what I mean? It'll be a woman in a van blocking somebody. It'll be a guy out in the street. They'll be shoving and pepper spraying. There'll be all different versions of people getting shot, but it will translate into people getting shot.
Absolutely.
Like if my kid was like, I'm going to go out and antagonize ICE officers, I'd be like, can't you just get on that nice Honda 125? I just watched you do a few hot laps around town.
Teach you how to do a wheelie.
Couple of 12 o'clockers. Just pull up next to a cruiser and kick the door real hard and just take off. He can't chase you.
Yeah, I've seen Bad News Bears. Kelly Leak was all through
right.
that
That's right.
that ball field. It's fine. Yeah. Yep. I don't know if we have the video up. I don't know if
Larchmont Village prostitute story. That is one.
Talk
I'm
about this one?
in.
Sure,
Yes.
yeah. So with much of the Los Angeles Police Department understaffed, vice units focused on the illegal sex trades in the infamous Figueroa Street corridor. Residents in the picturesque community of Larchmont Village say much of that business had spilled into their neighborhood.
Yeah, spilled is the operative word.
Family-friendly community now becoming a living nightmare. Residents in Larchmont Village say it's all because of rampant prostitution. They say the obscene behavior often takes place just a few feet from their homes.
And they say it is getting worse despite their pleas to police for help. KTLA's Rachel Menito.
So you can protest heterosexual sex going on your street, but you are not allowed to protest gay sex. So this is still legitimate. Residents are allowed to express their disgust about a heterosexual trade, but they're not allowed to express disgust at gay orgies going on their residential street.
Top is live from Larchmont Village with the story.
Great assignment.
Share, Rick, people tell us that oftentimes
Hold on
an
a
entire
second.
block.
There has to be some discussion in the newsroom. Like, all right, we need someone to go out to SeaWorld because a new dolphin was born, and the dolphin is named Cubby, and we're going to do a fluff piece on Cubby. It's beautiful. We're going to win. And then someone has to go out to Larchmont and stand in jizz. Now, who's Sheila, I saw your hand go up first.
Wait, whale jizz? No. Human jizz.
Tammy, better start hitting it. San Diego's going to be at least 3 hours with traffic. So why don't you chop up the van right now? Anyway, Tammy, I'll tell you what. I got a couple spent condoms in the bathroom I found. Why don't you bring those with you in case we need to get a cutaway or something like that, all right? We'll do it at night, too. Here we go.
Rick, people tell us that oftentimes an entire block will be filled with parked cars where people are engaging in sex, and then they'll throw out their trash and used items onto the street. This has actually been happening for many years, but lately it seems to be escalating.
By the way, can I pause it there? If you have to pick up a used item with a ballpoint pen, that's bad.
Yeah.
That's a bad item.
Yeah.
Because you don't pick up a Coke can with a ballpoint pen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's Blues Brothers.
Yeah,
one prophylactic, one
right.
used.
That's right.
During the day, this Larchmont neighborhood is picturesque. Longtime homeowners say it's when the sun goes down that things become sketchy and the unwanted encounters begin.
They're taking advantage of a human need in a disgusting way.
Larry says he often wakes up to this. A woman barely clothed walking across the street.
Man.
Used condoms, sanitary napkins, tissues, and all kinds of remnants from illegal sex trafficking and prostitution.
I have to come out in the morning and scoop up used condoms with semen coming out of them.
I looked at
You
a
can't
cat.
imagine.
Oh, you got to rewind it a second.
You have to do it every day. It's really quite remarkable.
Pause it. I'm always amazed at the people that have to give you the extra thing. You know what I mean?
Oh, they give you a little too much info?
Yeah, it's a weird thing. Like they'll go like, I went in to visit Nana and she was out of her mind and she's in dementia and she's in nothing but a gown. And so I was trying to soothe her, but her vagina was out.
Yeah,
you know, and you're like, come on, just say you visited your grandma. You just visited your grandma. We'll do the dementia gown math.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I'll keep Nana's vagina in my head. I don't need you saying it.
This guy says he had to pick up the used condom. So we've done the math.
Yeah.
We've done the math. We know there wasn't pixie dust or Nutella coming out of there. We know what's in the condom, but he had to add it.
Trafficking and prostitution.
I have to come out in the morning and scoop up used condoms with semen coming out of them. You can't imagine how disgusting it is. And to be able to have to do it every day, it's really quite remarkable.
Occasionally,
Hold on, let me put down my McFlurry or whatever. I got a vanilla shake. Let me set that down. All right, keep it going. Sorry.
To do it every day, it's really quite remarkable.
Occasionally, sometimes it's violent. The sex workers and Johns are getting in fights with each other. They're screaming at each other. They're getting physical with each other.
Other nearby neighborhoods impacted are St. Andrews Square, Windsor Square, and Koreatown. Karen Gilman says police advised them not to intervene. So instead, they've put up these signs letting the Johns and the pimps know they're on camera, and neighbors are recording their license.
All right, pause it there. Okay, here's the thing. If you're not going to force anything, then who cares how much camera time you get?
Yeah,
you know what I
what's the
mean? Like if
difference?
someone said, here's a bank. Yeah, you can't rob it. You might get shot. All right, there's another bank. It's filled with cameras. Oh, okay. But they're never going to do anything. I'd go, well, then are the cameras going to stop me from robbing the bank? No. Well, then I'll just rob the bank with the cameras in it. I don't care if I'm being filmed. Nobody in LA cares. No criminals care if they're being filmed because they never enforce anything, so it doesn't matter. We did this in the wrong-headed department, in the every single thing a leftist or progressive, every idea they have is wrong and ends up wrong department. This is one more of why are we criminalizing? This is a sex working community. This impacts women of color. And it's like, all right, more jizz on the sidewalk, everybody. Come on down. It's awesome. You guys should know, Nithya Raman, the dumb shit city council member who, by the way, was mad at Toyota for making catalytic converters so easy to steal on their car. That dumb shit, who was also responsible for tearing down the guy's treehouse in Sherman Oaks simultaneously while the Palisades in Malibu are burned to the ground. There's no permits. She's tearing down a treehouse. I mean, her constituency. She they had a big celebration like a year ago because they got a no U-turn sign taken down on Hyperion and Silver Lake where there was all gay cruising going on. And the neighbors were tired of all the gay guys cruising up and down and giving blowjobs in a shrub in front of their house. So at some point in like 1985, they put a sign up that said, no U-turn. Meaning you can't just have a never-ending succession of cars cruising in front of my house looking for gay hookups. She took the sign down with a bunch of he-she's and drag queens 9 months ago and looked at that as a huge victory for the citizens of Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. That's where their head is at. So you guys create all this stuff, and then it comes home to roost, and then the dumb shits in the neighborhood who voted for you come out and they go, I don't know what's going on here. There's people out in my front yard having sex. There's condoms everywhere, feminine napkins. We've called the city council. Yes, because we created this.
Yeah.
We've filled our city with rats. We stopped enforcing everything, and now we have this.
Mm-hmm.
Where's Nithya? I don't know. She's a poster child. She went to Harvard, this one.
Also, I think Jizz on the Sidewalk is a John Cougar Mellencamp
It is.
line. Yeah. Blood on the scarecrow, jizz on the sidewalk. Yeah.
So we'll find Nithya. But either way, this is their idea of what they're in office for, to go with drag queens down to Hyperion Boulevard and take down a U-turn sign. By the way, in a city that has more traffic signs about not turning right on red or no U-turns or no merge or whatever, all we are is one big traffic sign. She's interested in that traffic sign. Yeah, because they're dumb. But this is what we have.
There it is. Yeah,
it's the greatest. This is the great. I don't know. Is this a year old? This is the greatest piece of footage ever. And I like the idea that they celebrate this.
Martinez and Nithya Raman were on hand today to help remove the signs. They say the no cruising and no U-turn signs were put up in the 1990s to prevent people in the gay community from meeting up with other gay people.
Yes, on people's lawns.
Yes, in their
yards. That's why they were put. You caught us. We don't want people boffing on our lawn. Okay, where I raised my kids.
Yeah.
Yes, that's why they were up. But you can keep the story going because it's great.
I was also surprised that these U-turn signs were still up. And at first, they seem a little, okay, it's just a no U-turn sign. But when you learn the history of it and you realize that these were used to profile gay people, it's so important that we have these removed.
Well, it's not like you're a straight guy and you make a U-turn there and then the cops pull you over and you go, oh no, I'm into vag. That's my thing. And they go, oh, you know what? No ticket for you then. Sorry about that. No, it's for everybody.
They have no U-turn signs all over. Yes. No, the people who live in that neighborhood, what they did is they got to their city council people in 1989 and they lobbied to get the signs put up because they said, we're tired of these gay guys driving around in a circle in front of our house at 2 a.m. after they leave Cuffs, the bar in Silver Lake. Mm-hmm. So they put the signs up. But their number one job, by the way, Nithya Raman looks at her job as taking down tree houses and taking down signs, not permits, rebuilding, motorcycle gangs, graffiti. None of that.
Yeah.
This is her job.
Yeah, and they're not thinking about 2 years from now when somebody makes an illegal U-turn because there is no sign. They don't see it. They make that U-turn and somebody slams into the side of them, and now we got a couple of dead girls on our hand. Yes. They never think about that down the road. They're just thinking about the optics of it. Look at us and the thumbs up that we get for the LGBTQ community.
I'll play you the rest of this. It's great. This is by the middle of the week. What are you doing today?
Griffith Park Boulevard, right on the side of District 13, and today we removed
Hugo Soto Martinez, hyphenated Spanish name, always retarded.
That were used to discriminate against the LGBT community, and so we removed the last remnants of that really terrible policy, and so it's a very joyful and exciting day.
It's a big day.
Well,
big day. I live in Los Angeles where you don't realize how much this has impacted my life.
They were a relic of the 90s anti-gay policies in Los Angeles.
It's not anti-gay.
There were signs that explicitly said no cruising, which had been removed years ago.
Yeah, no cruising.
During the 1990s, it was very
There's
much
no cruising anywhere.
Area where a lot of the LGBT community had no other option but to meet each other in the streets. So this.
All right, you're gonna pause it. Listen, There's no other option if you're gay but to screw on people's lawns. Don't you have an apartment with a pull-out sofa or futon?
They have hourly rates at hotels. I mean, come on.
There was no other option. We just had to have sex against someone's shrub. There's no, you're feeling a little amorous.
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
Yeah,
you got to hit the lawn.
We saw an old sofa on the way here, and I told my girlfriend we must stop and fuck on this sofa outside of this person's house because it's there. We have no other choice. We can't go back to my apartment in Las Vegas.
No.
We must do it here on the streets of Los Angeles.
Yes. What are the choices? There's nothing else they could do. All right.
And had asked them what we could
by the way, I love that this guy reached out to the city. I love it when these raison d'etre of these idiots is like, I'm going to get a sign taken down. That's it. Yeah, such a hero. Such a hero.
That's all they're proposing.
Weird.
Get a sign taken down.
Jesus, man. His dad's sitting home in Indiana and he sees this.
Oh,
and
yeah.
He's like, oh, Jesus Christ, I told you.
Yep. I blame your side of the family, Maureen.
Yeah, that's right. All right, throw the clock up, please, Andrew. I just want to say this. Bigger picture. I want people to get this picture. All the fakakta ideas. I was explaining this to Dr. Drew, but I like this analogy. All the bad ideas that come out of the left, all of them. We're going to decriminalize prostitution because it disproportionately affects the brown and black community, and these are sex working men. And now you just got condoms everywhere and chicks being used. And I don't know, really... junky chicks being turned out by Johns and used for sex. That's the direct.
Hey, doesn't the Constitution promise that we get to pursue happiness, right? And if that's someone's happiness, who are we to judge, bro?
I think there's nothing wrong with that opinion. It's fine. I mean, I think you could argue against it and say it's not necessary. I liked what he said about. I mean, it's an obvious trite statement, but people are actually pretty normal and pretty nice across the United States and in most places in the world, in Japan or Australia, maybe Northern Ireland. I don't know. I'll say probably not, maybe not Northern Ireland. And it's trite, but it's true, right? Which is that the stereotypes, which I think the online discourse sort of leans into, it's just this weird, distorted caricature of people online. And it's trite, but it's true, right? But again, I'm totally going on vibes here, but I don't think there's anything wrong with the idea of having.
Okay, let's get back to Megyn Kelly.
And do a lot.
Yes.
Not to mention a little wardrobe action. Now, I do like a lot of them. They really are going to have to consider Ozempic and Accutane. Like I said, with really poor skin, it's very hard to get somebody to want you. It's just like a sign of ill health. So, but they have Accutane now, and it works miracles. And I just think like if you can get the skin cleared up, if you can get the teeth in good shape, basic hygiene in terms of like showering and smelling good, and then a thin body is important. You don't have to be a size 2, but you can't be a size 22. You have to like 12, we could work with it, but like feeling put together with the right wardrobe and projecting confidence and like a smile and a playfulness toward the opposite sex. These are basics to getting male attraction in your life, the good kind of male attraction. And basic male attraction, male attention, male caring, male listening, male dating, male opening a door for you, all of that, of course, culminating in sex with a male, is going to make these women feel so much better. Their lives are going to feel great. They're going to have natural euphoria. They're going to feel sexy, which is like you can't be angry if you feel sexy. Those two things are totally incongruous. And you can see these women haven't felt sexy maybe ever. And on your subject about the women, like the daddy issues, you raised a very good, interesting point. I had never considered like the dad as the root of some of what we're watching. But I do know women who are sort of messed up thanks to dad issues. And what I've seen is it also makes them choose the wrong guy over and over and over and over and over in their love life.
Yes.
Which only snowballs the resentment toward the men that they started with thanks to the dad in the first place.
Well, I remember a call many years ago, and now we're kind of seeing it. First off, if any of these kids, male or female, had great reverence for their father, the notion of them being filmed storming into a church and screaming at kids and parishioners or pushing up against ICE would be horrifying to them to think that their dad may see this on the news or find it somewhere. If you had great reverence for your father, if you hated his guts, then you'd hope he would see this. But I realized I spoke to a caller many years ago when I was doing Loveline, and it was a young woman, and I think she was in college, and she said, I have a black boyfriend, and I want to introduce him to my dad, but I don't think my dad would be very happy about me having a black boyfriend. And I said, well, tell me about it. How do you like your dad? And she said, I hate his guts. And I said, why? Because he was horrible and he's a racist. And I said, but you have a black boyfriend and you want to introduce your racist dad to him. And she said, yeah, I have to. And I said, where do you go to college? And she was like, in Indiana. It's like, where's Dad? He's in Orange County. Well, why do you have to introduce him to your boyfriend? Just let, so I got to do it. I go, you have to do it or you're paying your dad back? Now, what I realized then is she's attracted to black men and she doesn't even know why. She's attracted to black men because her dad was a racist and was horrible to her, and his greatest nightmare would be her bringing home a black boyfriend, and that's why she was attracted to black men. So she doesn't even know what attraction is. It was dictated by her father all those years ago. And I think a lot of these people that are screaming and they seem unhinged, it's not like they're making articulate arguments as to why we should abolish ICE. They're literally women who are in a fugue state screaming. And I realized, oh, that's a bunch of dad stuff from the past.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, don't you think feminism is playing a role here too? That we're now several generations into the you don't need men. It's all about you and your career. Also, children are a burden messaging.
Yes.
That these women have bought hook, line, and sinker without realizing that no, it's exactly the opposite. If you could forget actually landing a husband and then having children, which will make you much happier. But if you could just land a man, if you could just have it like some dates with a good guy, I mean, it would completely turn their mood around. There's no way they'd be on the streets of Minneapolis if they had a good man taking them out to dinner.
Completely agree. And yes, we've perpetrated this horrible hoax that has really ruined a lot of women by explaining to them they should go against their biological mandate. So kids, it's a mandate. Women, obviously it transcends feelings and love. It's a biology. And husband and protector and provider and homemaker and all these traditional things that traditionally make couples happy, societies happy, women happy. We essentially talk them out of it and explain that no children and lots of abortions and no man and some sort of corporate dead-end job would make you happy, and they're going out of their minds now. But they're going out of their minds because we've taken them out of their environment. It's like saying, when you see a swordfish or a marlin in the open sea, you go, they were made for that. They swim at 40 miles an hour, and we convince them that they needed to be up on the dock. And they're flailing now. And we're like, no, this is better for you. And it's like, I want to be where I belong. And
yes, and you're right. And they're leaning into it, right? We have a basic, women especially have a basic biological need to be pursued, to be admired, to be lusted after. It is a basic biological need. It's like all the things that are considered attractive are biologically developed to attract men, right? Like that's how we keep the human race going. And they're cutting each one of them out of their life. It's like the shaving of the head, like long hair is traditionally admired by men. It's considered more attractive. Like the no makeup thing, like Jordan Peterson, when he's done all these studies, like red lips are considered a sign of fertility, and men are more attracted to women who have like some color in their face and like lips that are a little pink or red. No, nothing. They want to make their faces look like they're one step away from comatose. Also fitness, a man looks at a fit woman and thinks, okay, yeah, that's how somebody who could carry. I mean, ideally like a good, and if you can get hot on top of it, man, so much the better. So but it's all rooted in this, like, well, what do I care? I don't need a man. I don't give a shit. I don't need a man. I don't need a boyfriend. I don't need, it's a bonus. We've heard some of them say it's a bonus to me that I have no husband and I have no children because I can just be out there fucking with ice. It's like, sister, that's exactly the opposite of what you need. I mean, like,
right.
I could get even more graphic, but you take my point.
And you never hear any messaging from the Democratic Party that's anything different than that. It's always...
No one will ever look at you in the eyes and say, get more attractive and get effed. That's what you need. Like,
no
one's going to give them that honesty.
No, I agree. And they send the opposite message, which is brag about how many abortions we've had and how we don't need men. And then everyone is miserable. In a weird way, I said to Dr. Drew many years ago on Loveline, I would say to him, we're ruining women and we're ruining the black community. And I mean it in the same sort of way. We're said to the black community, you don't need a husband, have as many kids, we'll pay you, stay home, here's a project, free housing, and 50 years later, nothing has come out the other end, and they've been damaged by it. We sent a message to the black community that was the wrong message. The message should have been, this is the best nation in the world to get stuff done. There's no discrimination that's ever going to hold you back. Now just go out and make some hay while the sun shines. But instead we sent systemic racism. It's in the water. It's in the air. Everybody who sees you as a black person, not as an American or an individual or one of God's creatures. And if you try, you'll still never get ahead because of this horrible society we've crafted. So stay home and get a government check. It did not work out well for them. And with women, we sent another message, but it was the wrong message. But it all came from the Democratic side of the aisle, and we fucked with them a lot. And they're not, I would say probably the least happy women on the planet are probably black women at this point, because they got a 1-2 punch. They got the feminine side, they got the welfare side and the housing side, and they're 98% Democratic voters. So they are struggling. But the message ruined, or at least damaged, both sides. Now, of course, there's successful black people, and of course, there's successful women. They didn't get all of them, but they damaged both those communities badly.
Ferguson, officer-involved shooting of Michael Brown. It's about all of this. Like, what happened to Ferguson, Missouri? What did the government do to Ferguson, Missouri that led to these housing projects, that led to Michael Brown living the way he did and his family, that led to all these people on the streets falsely shouting, hands up, don't shoot? Like, what created that environment? And where was Ferguson, Missouri back in the 1950s before the Great Society and Lyndon Johnson swooped in to, quote, help people? Means exactly what it says. Like, stop. Because every time the government has tried to intervene to, quote, help the black community, they've wound up worse off, worse for the wear. And the same, you're absolutely right, is true for women.
Okay, let's leave it there. I'll